Too niche. Not right now. Soon, but not yet. That's a little too on the nose, I think. Uh, yeah, okay, why not? Sleeping Dogs is one of those games that if you mention it to someone, you might get an, "Oh yeah, that was pretty cool," or "Yeah, I think I played that," except if you ask me. If you ask me about Sleeping Dogs, I'd tell you it was one of my favorites of the open world crime sandbox genre. At least I thought it was before replaying it for this video. For years, I thought Sleeping Dogs felt different, where the other games in the space were firstly about the open world and the freedom for the player to do what they wanted. Sleeping Dogs felt like it had something to say for the genre, a genre that flooded the market in the mid to late 2000s and early 2010s. You know the type, your Grand Theft Autos, Saints Rows, Mafias, Just Cause. You've probably played one of these and you know what I'm talking about. I always thought Sleeping Dogs felt mature, and that it had a story that was front and center in the game, where Nico Bellic's depressing tale of revenge was a backdrop to Liberty City's expansive playground. I always thought Wei Shen's double-agent story of violence in gang-infested Hong Kong was the main dish for the open-world game, until I played it again this year. Unfortunately, I think Sleeping Dogs falls into a lot of the same pitfalls that other games in the space did and still do, and while it does have a lot of great qualities, I think it ends up falling short in a lot of places. So today, obviously, I want to talk about Sleeping Dogs, why it mattered to me over a decade ago, and why I don't think it stands as strong as I thought it did going on 13 years later. Let's take it from the top and talk about how Sleeping Dogs came to be. Sleeping Dogs was originally revealed in 2009 as True Crimes Hong Kong, as part of Activision's True Crime franchise. The True Crime franchise wasn't too dissimilar from its contemporaries. It was yet another crime simulator, with its key difference from other titles being that you played as an undercover police officer. While the effectiveness of that veneer can be argued, it cannot be denied that it was an interesting take on the formula. Instead of your crime spree being the result of Rico Rodriguez taking his job description a little too loosely, now it was an act of defiance against your character's main goals and motivation. The true crime title was short-lived though, as in 2011, Activision dropped the development team citing quality issues that would fail to help the game stand out in the genre. The team was picked back up later that year by Square Enix, offering to publish the game with belief in the developer's vision, stating the game's playability and potential, whatever the hell that means. Sleeping Dogs was developed by United Front Games, who previously worked on Mod Nation Racers and would go on to working on Little Big Planet Karting, with additional development support on a handful of other titles. If you hadn't heard of this studio or their games, yeah, that makes sense, as they unfortunately announced their closure in 2016. Sleeping Dogs, unfortunately, was not able to secure itself as a long-standing franchise, despite being the 20th bestseller of 2012 and the #1 best-selling original video game property for the year. From the game's release to United Front's closure, there were talks of a sequel, a spin-off, a film adaptation, all signs of interest from the studio and publisher to continue the series, but nothing ever stuck. Fortunately, we did get a definitive edition release of the game in 2014, including all of the downloadable content releases along with some visual and gameplay improvements bundled into one nice package. This will be the version of the game I'll be talking about today. There aren't too many noteworthy differences between the original release and this version, so consider it to be a facelift for your viewing pleasure. If there's anything that I'm aware of that was changed in this release, I'll be sure to point it out, or you can correct me in the comments. Now that we know a little bit about how Sleeping Dogs came to be, let's get right into talking about the core of the game, its narrative. The story in Sleeping Dogs is a bit of a mess, honestly. It's a constant back and forth between drug busts, martial arts lessons, dates with girlfriends, street races, petty thievery, gang violence, and I could go on if I really thought about it. It doesn't spend too much time developing characters in the main story, other than our protagonist, Wei Shen, whose developments come through like a bull in a china shop. A large part of the issue is the diversity in content and the means of which that content is presented to the player. You want to shoot a bunch of guns in a big street war? Yeah, we have that covered, but first you need to investigate this murder spree and hook up with this karaoke hostess. Try not to think too much about it, just focus on the cool action set piece that you get to play later. What I'm trying to say is that Sleeping Dogs is attempting to cover a lot of ground. but it does so in a way that leaves a lot to be desired, leaving many loose ends and underdeveloped threads with many unsatisfying conclusions and uninteresting outcomes. I'm not looking to just attack this game or come at it for being too ambitious. I just think with a more critical look, a lot of what Sleeping Dogs has to offer in its main story is lackluster. Hopefully, as we go through the story together, you can understand where I'm coming from and can see how I've come to dislike the narrative in a lot of ways. With all that being said, let's take it from the top. There will be a spoiler warning a little later after we set the scene, so if you're looking out for that, stay tuned. The story begins from the perspective of a police sting operation in the city of Hong Kong. Multiple officers are surrounding a monitor, watching as Wei Shen and another man approach some kind of back alley deal. The deal goes sideways when a security guard approaches and the buyer freaks out, attacking the guard with a cleaver. Police are sent to apprehend the suspects, and we shift into a third-person perspective of Wei Shen. Wei runs away from the police alongside his partner, eventually leading both to being captured and arrested. We then see Wei sitting in a cell when he is approached by another inmate, Jackie Ma, an old friend from his childhood neighborhood. It's revealed to us that Wei has been in the United States for the past 15 years, only recently returning to Hong Kong. Wei subtly gets some information about gang activity in the area out of Jackie, and I like this detail a lot. Wei is consistently a smooth talker when he speaks to people, he knows how to get information he wants, and he knows how to twist things to get people on his side. It even becomes a small mechanic throughout the game, which I'll get more into later. Jackie gets called to leave holding, and Wei offers his help with any work if Jackie needs it. The next scene fades in as Wei is being greeted by a police interrogation, stating the evidence against him has up and disappeared yet again, and that's exactly what they wanted. The police officers, Pendrew and Raymond, uncuff Wei, and the air in the room shifts to a much more friendly tone. Wei gets briefed on his mission again, for the player's sake, to infiltrate the Sun On Yi Triad, or gang, and get close to Winston Chu, reporting on any findings to Raymond, his undercover handler. Raymond tries to give Wei some support by warning him about how dangerous the Hong Kong gangs can and will be, and Wei immediately shuts him down with hostility, stating that he knows the people in these gangs better than any intel could tell them since he grew up with these people. Wei dismisses himself to get work on cozying up to Winston while Pendrew and Raymond hang back to discuss Wei. Raymond has concerns about Wei's history of extreme behavior and a potential personal revenge against the Triads, but Pendrew reassures him that Wei will be effective. Outside of jail, Wei meets up with Jackie Ma again to pursue work for Winston. Jackie lets on that recently, someone in the Sun On Yi was found out to be an undercover cop, and that has made everyone in Winston's branch, the Water Street Gang, on edge. Jackie and Wei bump into some thugs, and Wei thoroughly beats them up. The two eventually make it to the Golden Koi, Winston's base of operations and his mother's restaurant. Upon entering, Wei is stopped by Conroy, an enforcer for Winston. Jackie vouches for Wei, but Winston questions his validity. Winston suddenly remembers Wei for his sister, commenting on her appearance and asking where she is. Wei tells Winston that she's dead, which seems to still be a sore subject for Wei. Winston decides Wei is up for a test and sends him out with Conroy. Conroy immediately undermines Winston and attempts to ambush Wei behind the restaurant, a sort of hazing for initiation in the Water Street Gang. As Wei and the men fight, Dog Eyes, the leader of the Jade Gang, another branch of the Sun On Yi, approaches the restaurant. Dog Eyes speaks to Winston about taking over part of his operations, and makes a comment about Wei's sister, prompting both Wei and Winston to threaten him. Winston sends Wei and Jackie off to the night market to run their rackets and ensure people know who still runs the neighborhood. While Wei and Jackie walk the night market, Wei opens up a bit more about his sister, revealing that she overdosed a few years ago, shortly after he and his family relocated to the United States. Jackie gives his condolences and says that he won't tell anybody about it, that his childhood best friend deserves more loyalty than his bosses do. After collecting money from local vendors and businesses, Wei comes back to Winston, who has another problem. A local dealer has suddenly swapped allegiances and is paying Dog Eyes' gang for protection. Winston wants the dealer dealt with and wants to remind the dealer who he should be loyal to. Tracking down the dealer leads Wei into an extended chase through the night market, gaining the attention of the police and leading to Wei being arrested again. This time, Wei is greeted by Detective Tang, a compassionate officer trying to offer Wei an alternative path in the place of crime. Wei teases Tang for her good cop routine until she is interrupted by Pendrew entering the room, dismissing Tang from the interrogation and revealing to Tang that Wei is an undercover agent for the Hong Kong police. Pendrew suggests that Tang and Wei actually work together rather than Tang pushing her people onto Wei's operation, dismissing both from the room. I think this is a good point for the spoiler warning. The rest of the story plays out following these established threads. Wei's balance of police duty and triad work and the tension or uneasy atmosphere both provide in each other's presence. Throughout the game, stakes get higher, things get more dire, Wei becomes a liar, and everyone is none the wiser. That was actually really bad, sorry. But yeah, the rest of the game is about a 12-hour burn of this framing, Wei's balancing act. Like I mentioned at the top of the story section, I don't think the balancing of the game's design and pacing does a very good job for a satisfying narrative. But the story itself is engaging enough to keep playing through to see it to the end. You'll have a conclusion, you'll have some reveals and twists, and you'll get a teeny bit of character development out of Wei throughout the story. Alright, with that out of the way, let's keep chugging along. Strap in, it's gonna get messy, and we're gonna pick up the pace a bit. Following his arrest, Wei decides that he needs to move up in the ranks of the Sun On Yi faster, deciding to work with Jackie to source a heist for Winston. The job goes smoothly, with Winston acknowledging Wei's efforts and rewarding him with some of the gang's racketeering income. Meanwhile, Detective Tang has been working to capture a local dealer, Popstar, and wants to employ Wei to help her catch Popstar in the act. Wei agrees, locating his supplier and hacking into a nearby CCTV camera to catch Popstar on a live feed, arresting him on the spot. Winston's next gig asks Wei to head to Club Bam Bam to shake down
We talk later.
the owner to make sure he stays under Winston's protection racket instead of going to Dog Eyes. Following the job, Raymond, one of Wei's handlers, asks to meet Wei and check in on his mental and emotional health. And frankly, our man isn't looking or sounding too hot in this one. Wei blows up on Raymond, saying that he and Raymond are different kind of cops, and that Wei has different rules from Raymond, but Raymond keeps a level head and reminds him that they're both officers of the law and that they should act like it. Wei leaves in a huff, and Raymond probably writes something mean in his notebook. The next time we visit Winston, he accuses Wei of being a rat, meaning working as an undercover cop, since Wei was working closely with a dealer that just got arrested for Detective Tang. He's right on the money. This is a weird flash of clairvoyance in Winston here because the rest of the game he blindly trusts Wei. Anyways, Wei is able to spin the narrative so that Winston believes that the dealer's supplier is the rat, since they've been having problems with the supplier lately anyway. Immediately following this meeting, Raymond calls Wei requesting that he plant a surveillance bug in Winston's HQ, in the top room of the Golden Koi. Wei obliges, sneaking into the koi through a skylight in the kitchen. From here on, the police cases become soft requirements for progression in the story, meaning they don't need to be completed tangentially with the main story missions surrounding the Triad and Wei's undercover work. This is where my issues with the pacing of the main story begin. What really upsets the balance is the lack of weight behind the police cases that are treated as mandatory requirements for progression in the story, when the game just decides it's necessary. At some point, you need to complete certain police cases to progress the main story. The police cases can be introduced one after another, I believe, which will either lead the player to having Wei completely neglect his undercover assignment for days or weeks on end, or completely halt the progression of the narrative in the main assignments because the player hasn't completed the prerequisite police case. This creates an imbalance in what missions feel like main missions that should be treated like critical path content, and what missions are optional or a bonus to the main story, like side quests. The police cases exist, to me, in this weird limbo state between these two. Not quite on the level of main mission content, but they are required to unlock the actual main missions. On top of all of this, there's absolutely no overlap between the main missions and the police cases, like the interaction with Winston and Wei about the recent dealer arrest. You do meet one of Wei's girlfriends in the main mission line, which leads you into a police case if you choose to complete her optional date. But to me, that's more that the date mission ended up being more important than I expected because, again, the date was optional. All of this to say that my retelling of the narrative may seem disjointed at times because the police work comes in and changes the pacing quite a bit and refocuses the narrative for a few missions at random times. It's all technically part of the critical path main story progression, so I want to lay everything out on the table here in this section rather than ruining the pacing of the video to come back and talk about the police cases separately in a later part, like the side content or something. And lastly, it's not that I don't think two narratives can run concurrently to each other, or that two questlines can't have my focus at the same time. It really boils down to the treatment of the police cases seeming more like busywork to pad out the runtime of the game, and to potentially paint Wei as still acting like a cop. Cause man, he sure isn't being an upstanding officer of the law in the main Triad missions. Okay, that was a lot of words to say it's about to get even messier. Tang starts up a new police case with Wei. A local street racer named Hotshot is suspected to be killing his way to the top of the racing scene in Hong Kong, eliminating his competition on the road. Tang wants Wei to infiltrate the underground racing league and apprehend Hotshot before he can kill any other racers. Wei slowly climbs the ranks in the racing scene and gets the attention of Ace, another racer, and Hotshot, Wei's target. Ace suspects that Hotshot is after him next since they're racing tonight and Hotshot was eager to get him on the road. Wei calls Ace in the middle of the race to triangulate his position, but it's too late. Ace's girlfriend answers the phone saying they've been knocked off of the highway into the harbor and Ace was killed in the collision. Following Ace's death, Wei challenges Hotshot personally and directs him in a race right into a police blockade where he is swiftly arrested. At some point while Wei is cleaning up the streets, that's a racing joke for all you racists out there, Tiffany from Club Bam Bam calls Wei, saying that a Jade gang member named Charlie has left his gun at the club and told Tiffany to deal with it. Wei comes to the club to secure the gun, and lets his police handlers know about the gun. Pendrew asks to meet Wei with the gun and uses the firearm to recreate a crime scene to incriminate the owner in a gang shooting. I really like this scene. It uses the shooting and cover mechanics in the base game in a creative way. It shows to the player Pendrew and potentially Wei's thought process when approaching crime scenes, and it showcases that Pendrew is willing to get his hands dirty to bring down some criminals. Very effective storytelling and some great reuse of mechanics and silly filters to create some illusions. Soon after, Wei gets a message that Winston's HQ has been shot up by Dog Eye's gang. Meeting with Winston, he's on the phone and rallying his gang to attack one of Dog Eye's source of income as retaliation. Wei instead suggests that Winston and his men take over the operation rather than destroy it to hurt Dog Eyes and benefit themselves in one move. Winston likes the plan and notices the initiative in Wei, sending Wei to the warehouse to lead the assault himself. However, arriving at the warehouse, Wei ends up doing more than leading the assault as Winston's men still doubt he's legit, telling him that if he's willing to kill Dog Eyes' men, they'll believe he's part of the Sun On Yi. So, Wei heads inside and kills a lot of men. Eey, hope he turned off the body cam for that one. Wei tracks down the manager of the business and forces him to work under Winston. After seeing what Wei's done with the place, Winston's men are no longer suspicious of Wei and welcome him as a fellow Water Street boy. Following his success with the warehouse, Winston asks Wei to accompany him on a meeting with Uncle Po, the chairman of the Sun On Yi. On the way, Winston confides in Wei to look after his family and his people if anything happens to him from this meeting. While speaking with Uncle Po, Po talks about loyalty to the Triad and the gang above all else, complimenting Wei's initiative while Wei tries to put the onus back onto Winston to stay out of the chairman's spotlight. Po insists that Wei joins an associate on a job for the day, and while leaving the building, Wei is stopped by Ricky, one of Po's personal bodyguards, telling Wei to contact him if he's ever looking for serious work. From here on, I'm gonna try to flash a little graph I made to help us keep track of major players in the Triad since I'll be saying a lot of names and there's only more to come. Here's a first glance. I'm not gonna call it out every time it's on screen, but I'll show it if anything changes or people shift around. Wei meets with Raymond again, who is upset with Wei for his methods lately, like shooting up a warehouse and taking its management hostage, pretty understandable, but Wei questions if Raymond has been reading his full reports or just looking at news headlines. Wei further implies that if Raymond had read his personal reports, he would know that Wei met Uncle Po face to face. With that, Wei has the upper hand again in this meeting, with Raymond conceding again and letting Wei go. The next morning, Winston asks Wei to help his fiancée Peggy to get some things ready for their upcoming wedding. Wei agrees and chauffeurs Peggy around town, getting some last-minute wedding planning chores out of the way. I like this mission a lot. It's a good change of pace. We get to see a side of Wei that isn't explored whatsoever in the main missions and only really in the optional dates. Wei Shen is a human being outside of being a police officer and a Triad member. He likes to make jokes, he's sarcastic, charismatic, and he even goes the extra mile to make Peggy's wedding bouquet perfect for her, stealing a sacred flower from a local temple. He's a nice good guy at his core, stuck in a conflicted, dangerous, and violent world. It's a shame we don't see more of him. With the wedding planning out of the way, the day has finally come and everyone is gathered for Peggy and Winston's matrimony. Everything seems to be going well, but while Wei steps outside to the parking lot to grab a case of Uncle Po's favorite wine, the piece is interrupted by multiple screams coming from inside the banquet hall. Wei rushes inside to find that servers and waitstaff are undercover hitmen, attacking wedding guests and executing Peggy and Winston together on their wedding day. As Wei finds Winston and Peggy lying together, Winston asks Wei to get Peggy out of the massacre because she didn't deserve to die like this. It's a pretty good emotional beat, and I kind of dislike that Wei doesn't do anything for Peggy in the moment. It's immediately cut by more shooting, and it would have been nice to have a human moment for Wei again, face to face with a woman he just bonded with personally the day before, now dead. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. All I'm saying is, did we really need to shoot 2 more guys right here? Could have kept the emotions cranked to 11, but I guess I needed that dopamine kick. Anyways, Wei fights through more hitmen at the wedding until he finds Uncle Po injured, but alive. Wei offers to protect and guide Po out to safety, carrying him on his shoulder while fighting off some more gunmen along the way. Wei gets Po to a hospital, and we fade out into a new meeting with Raymond. Raymond seems to be here to reassure Wei about what just happened, the potential trauma of the wedding massacre, and to relieve him of his duty, as his objective to get intel on Winston isn't really in play anymore. Wei fires back as usual, stating that he is Winston now. He's in his place and he's closer to the Red Pulls, the higher-ups of the Sun on Yi. Raymond reminds Wei that he's still a cop, still a law-abiding citizen, but it's clear that this isn't clicking with Wei how Raymond wants it to. Wei stomps off again, and it's very clear to us that Wei isn't dealing with his double life as well as he thinks he is. Actually, let's talk about that a little more. Throughout the game, occasionally, your next main objective will be to go to bed to progress to the next day. When doing so, Wei will wake up from constant nightmares, typically revolving around what's been going on in the story recently or parts of his past, like his sister's death. The only indication we get of Wei's shaky mental health are these brief wake-up scenes and meetings with Raymond or Pendrew where he erupts at them in frustration. I wish this was explored a bit more, Wei's wavering mental state becoming something that plagues how he interacts with Triad members or other cops, maybe having these emotional outbursts with the wrong people and leading into trouble with either side of his life. Or again, having more human, personal moments with Wei aside from the Peggy mission and the date missions. It's clear that the development team intended for Wei's mental health decline to be part of the narrative, but it doesn't really go anywhere other than Wei seeming like an unpleasant coworker with his HKPD pals. You could make the case for his mental state being a determinant factor in some of his decisions later, but I think his decisions come more circumstantially than based around irrational emotion. Alright, armchair psychology over, back into the mix. With Winston dead, Wei steps up into his place and becomes the figurehead for the Water Street Gang. Ponytail, a representative for Big Smile Lee, another Red Bull in the Sun On Yi triad, has come to Club Bam Bam to muscle out the Water Street Gang from their businesses and direct the income to Big Smile Lee. Wei threatens and turns him away, so Ponytail immediately orders an attack on the club. Wei protects the business and pursues Ponytail. The two fight and police arrive. Ponytail manages to slip away while Wei begins his own escape. A limo pulls up nearby and waves Wei in, helping Wei avoid capture. Inside, Wei is greeted by Broken Nose Zhang, another Red Pole who is interested in protecting Wei if he's willing to support her in taking Uncle Po's position as chairman, ensuring Big Smile Lee or anyone else doesn't get the gig. Wei agrees, given he doesn't have much choice at the moment, and begins a new partnership with Zhang. After all that hoopla, Jackie calls Wei and tells him that someone named Nas scammed him out of a payment for a stolen shipment of goods. Wei actually knows Nas, knowing that he's a police informant who doesn't want his cover blown at the likely cost of his life, and Nas knows that Wei is undercover too. So, of course, Nas sends his goons to kill Wei to make sure he remains undercover, which doesn't work too well. Wei stops his men, captures Nas, and takes him to Detective Tang to ensure he stays put during Wei's operation. Since I mentioned Tang, there's another police case we can cover. Recently, dead Sun On Yi gang members have been washing up underneath the bridges all over Hong Kong. Tang fills in Wei on the most recent crime scene, and Wei infiltrates the scene to get a closer look at the victims. It turns out the gangsters have not only been murdered, but their organs have been surgically removed. Wei also finds one of his men, Vincent, among the newest victims. To continue the investigation, Wei goes undercover at a local hospital to check organ transplant records or surgery schedules. Wei successfully finds evidence that a doctor in the hospital has been meeting with the 18K, another triad operating in Hong Kong, in a plan to kill Sun On Yi soldiers in surgery and sell their organs in black market deals. Wei bugs the doctor's office and fills Tang in with the update. Soon after, Tang calls Wei since she's been listening in on the surveillance device, and it sounds like the 18K are getting ready to deliver someone to their doctor. Wei intercepts the kidnapping and takes the car and hostage to Tang, letting the hostage go into police custody and informing Tang of where the 18K were planning on meeting the doctor so that he can be arrested as well. With the doctor arrested off screen, we can wrap up another police case. Wei decides to meet with Mrs. Chu, Winston's mother, who wants Winston's killer delivered to her so that she can deal with him personally. Wei tracks the man down and brings him to the restaurant where it is heavily implied that she butchers him and prepares his body in her food. Through butchering and torturing the man before that, Mrs. Chu is able to uncover that Dog Eyes was the man who planned the wedding assassination. Wei tracks down Dog Eyes and brings him to Mrs. Chu's chop shop as well, getting him out of the picture. This is another unsatisfactory conclusion to me. Dog Eyes has been built up so far for the entire game as Winston's, now Wei's, primary opposition on the street level, and suddenly he's dealt with over the course of 2 missions after not being mentioned since the first meeting with Uncle Po. It's been hours since we've seen Dog Eyes, and now he's just gone and dead because someone thought it was poetic justice that Winston's mom got to kill her son's killer. Sure, it's a nicely wrapped bow for Mrs. Chu, but I'm not playing as Mrs. Chu. The player doesn't get much satisfaction in taking out Dog Eyes, especially not with his boss fight, but we'll talk more about those at length later. Wei decides to visit Uncle Po in the hospital and is officially appointed to be a Red Pole by Po. Wei takes on Jackie as an official member of the Sun On Yee as well, promoting both from just members of the Water Street Gang. To cement their positions, Wei and Jackie are tasked with taking care of a dealer that's switching sides on the Sun On Yee. When the dealer is confronted, he pulls a gun on Wei, but Jackie manages to shoot the dealer first. Jackie reveals it's the first person he's ever killed, and he is very shaken by it. The 2 new Sun On Yee members meet again with their new family and are initiated into their official ranks with a super subtle speech about loyalty and betrayal in the Sun On Yee. In his next meeting with Raymond, Wei is directed to getting a lead on Sunny Wo thanks to his new position in the Triad. Sunny Wo is a large figure in the gang that brings in a massive revenue stream, so taking him out would have obvious repercussions on the gang. Raymond also mentions that Jackie will be arrested soon since he's been right behind Wei the entire time, during all his movement in the Sun On Yee, and his usefulness as a pawn between Wei and others has run out. Wei heavily objects to the arrest and says that he will not be part of the operation. Coincidentally, when Wei reaches out to Jackie next, Jackie asks Wei for help with another gig, a small jewel heist. Throughout the mission, Jackie and Wei are more distant than usual, with Jackie talking a lot about how he felt when he killed the dealer just a few days prior, and feeling very introspective about his place in a gang. I like this from Jackie. The first impression that you get from him is an easygoing, overly enthusiastic gangbanger that feels out of place at best. It makes sense that when faced with the harder, more violent aspects of the lifestyle, he'd back away from them and react differently than those around him. I wish this was explored more and that Jackie got more screen time following this. As it stands, he's a comic relief character that gets in over his head, and we'll see how that ends up for him soon. I really think there's missed potential from a unique perspective in Jackie. Anywho, the job goes well enough, the boys secure the goods, and all is well. Jackie and Wei split so that Jackie can pawn off their ill-gotten gains, but as soon as he leaves Wei to do so, he's ambushed by the police and placed in custody. Following the arrest, Ricky, Poe's bodyguard, calls Wei and asks him to rush to the hospital as there's an active attempt on Uncle Poe's life, an attack by the 18K Triad. Arriving at the hospital, 18K soldiers are executing hospital staff and searching for Poe. Wei interferes and fights through the hospital, reaching Poe and defending him with Ricky. Ricky theorizes that there's a larger scheme against Poe than anyone realizes, that the Triads are falling apart altogether. Ricky then asks Wei to meet him at Sunny Wo's place, tying together the request from Penju and Raymond to pursue Sunny in place of Winston. Wei meets Sunny, a legitimate Triad businessman that handles celebrity clients and the pornography business for the Triad. Sunny asks Wei to escort a client, King, an American rapper, around town and show him a good time. Wei takes King to a karaoke bar. The next time Sunny needs Wei's help, he asks Wei to pick up Vivian Liu, a high-profile actress that works for Sunny. Vivian, expecting her boyfriend Ricky, is upset that some random thug is here to drive her and her friend around. Vivian's friend Sandra, however, is excited by the chance to date a criminal and wants Wei to drive the girls in a street race. Wei gives in, winning a race with the girls in tow, and takes them home. Up next in my notes, I have the final police case, the one that you get after completing a date with a specific girlfriend, so let's just get it out of the way here. I'll talk a tiny bit more about the date when I go into side content in the game, but to catch everyone up, Wei met Ileana at a karaoke bar, we got her phone number, we did some parkour together, Wei and Ileana practiced some wrestling moves in bed, and now her friend is missing and it's Wei's problem. Ileana suspects that her friend has been trafficked, an issue that a lot of immigrant women face in Hong Kong, and she suggests a Wei that he try talking to one of her friend's regular customers about where she's been. Wei talks to the guy, and it turns out that he's been paying for her apartment, so he sends Wei there to talk to her. Wei arrives at the place and it's been torn apart, either a clear sign of a struggle or someone ripped through the place to find something. Regardless, Wei finds a document that implies a well-known local gambler might have something to do with the girl's disappearance. Wei meets the gambler on a gambling barge out in the harbor and plays mahjong poker with him for a few hands. I've never heard of mahjong poker, but thank God I've been playing Balatro for the last few weeks so I can understand half of the game. Win or lose, Wei eventually bets something more than money on the table, a primo blonde girl without any documentation, the girl being Ileana, Wei's girlfriend. What a gentleman. The gambler agrees and takes the bet, and again, regardless of the outcome, offers to buy Ileana or wants to meet Wei later to take her off his hands. Wei fills Ileana in on the plan to use her to keep track of the gambler, and she's surprisingly cool with it. They meet the gambler and Wei sends Ileana off with him. Following his trail, Wei is led to an underground lair in the sewer system where multiple girls are being held inside a cell. Wei fights off some goons, frees the girls, including Ileana and her friend, and all is well. And that's that for the police work in the game. At least the major content. There's much lesser, smaller side content that's cop heavy, but that's all for the big leagues. There's not even a cutscene to wrap this one up, just a phone call from Tang with a voice line that sounds like it could have been played after any case wrapping up. So, another unsatisfactory conclusion for the books. We did get a cool souped up police car, but I don't stop at parking garages often enough to go through my own vehicles and pull it out to make good use of it. Back into the main Triad storyline, Broken Nose Zhang has contacted Wei about convincing Tuchin, Uncle Po's blood-related nephew, to step down from his temporary chairman position to force an election for a permanent figure, as Tuchin is likely to fall in the hands of Big Smile Lee eventually due to a drug addiction. Zhang suggests that Wei convince Tuchin to quit by playing into his spiritual superstition, breaking the feng shui in his home, convincing him that spirits are telling him to change his life. Wei heads to Tuchin's house to do so, along with a new friend, Old Salty Crab, and they break some vases, move some furniture, and steal a few artifacts to make it look like spirits have interrupted the space. Upon arriving home, Tuchin takes the signs just as they predicted and steps down as temporary chairman. Very soon after, Uncle Po dies. We just, get a phone call about it, and he's now dead. There's no real preamble or any kind of fanfare for that. Then, to really break up the flow here, Sunny asks Wei to plant a bug in an apartment for him, not informing him that the apartment he's breaking into is Vivian and Ricky's. The couple come home while Wei is on the job, so Wei has to sneak out quickly as his HKPD contacts are trying to get in touch. Wei meets up with Pendrew to update him on Sunny, convenient timing with our last gig, but Wei is still upset with the police force for how they handled Jackie. Wei bargains his new info on Sunny and the bug he just planted for him on the terms that Jackie is freed from prison. Pendrew agrees, and Wei leaves to get a copy of the surveillance program for Pendrew. Or something. I don't really understand what Wei is physically getting for Pendrew here. We just planted the bug, so there's nothing that's been recorded so far, and I don't know of any physical evidence we have on Sunny. Whatever. When Wei gets back to his apartment, Vivian greets him at the door, sent by Sunny to reward him for a job well done, not knowing the job was to monitor her apartment. Wei turns her down respectfully and politely, and Vivian takes a very emotional, appreciative reaction to it. Wei delivers a payload on Sunny to Pendrew, and Pendrew obliges with Jackie's release. Pendrew tries to imply that Wei should be well past done with his undercover duties and that he should be dismissed, but Wei is too invested in stopping Big Smiley's takeover of the Triads, insisting that it must be stopped instead of prolonged. With Jackie free from jail, Wei wants to pick him up and bring him to Uncle Po's funeral. Naturally, I put on my Sunday best and hopped in a car that I thought Jackie would appreciate. The two head to the funeral, and on the way, Jackie again longs to be free of the criminal lifestyle. Everyone is gathered at the grave. Sunny is arrested as he arrives late to the morning, with 18K soldiers standing by. Pendrew intentionally ignores the 18K's presence during the arrest and essentially co-signs whatever they end up doing to the Sun On Yee at the funeral. A large fight breaks out, Wei and company fight through and escape unscathed. But, with Po permanently gone now, a full-time chairman must be elected for the Sun On Yee. Conroy, Winston's old enforcer, reaches out to Wei that something is going down at Mrs. Chu's place, the Golden Koi. Wei heads out to meet Conroy, but he's ambushed by Big Smile Lee's soldiers. Fighting off the attackers, Wei continues to the Golden Koi and defends it from more thugs. Leaving the Koi, Wei heads out to tell Ricky that Big Smile Lee seems to be making a big final push against anyone that would oppose him becoming the new chairman, hoping to win Ricky over to help Wei appoint Zhang. Ricky reluctantly agrees to keep Vivian safe since Zhang would likely be kinder to her than Lee would. Raymond, Wei's handler, wants to meet Wei privately off the record. Raymond wants to warn Wei that Pendrew is upset with him and ready to arrest him for going against his order in his undercover operation. Raymond suggests that Pendrew has gone off the handle and is unpredictable now since the funeral. While meeting with Raymond, Wei gets a phone call from Jackie, though the person on the other end of the phone claims to have kidnapped Jackie and requests Wei's presence. Wei agrees to meet the kidnapper and is ambushed by more 18K members, then tortures the last one alive to get information about where Jackie has been taken. Wei triangulates the kidnapper's position and stops him, taking his phone and finding a text stating where Jackie was taken. Jackie has been buried alive on an island in the harbor. Wei heads out to the island immediately to rescue Jackie, and Jackie again laments how badly he just wants to have a normal life now. Wei asks that, as his last act as a Sun On Yee member, if Jackie could testify against Big Smile Lee for the chairman position. Jackie agrees for Wei's sake. The next morning, Wei wakes up to a text from Jackie, asking to meet. The text was a ploy again, and Wei finds Jackie's corpse strung up in a parking garage. Upon finding his body, Wei is knocked unconscious and kidnapped by the 18K, specifically a Mr. Tong, an interrogator and torturer for the Triad. Wei comes in and out of consciousness, having flashbacks of events throughout the game while being tortured by Mr. Tong. Tong monologues about Lee's plans and Pendrew's involvement with Lee, including outing Wei to the Triads. Eventually, Wei is left alone long enough to wake up and escape, fighting his way through the compound and killing Mr. Tong, the torturer, and then he heads out to pursue Big Smile Lee for a finale. Wei fights through Lee's compound, a large dockyard with many boats, killing a lot of dudes and chasing Lee throughout. Eventually, Lee boards a boat and Wei barely manages to mount the hull of the boat while he disembarks. Lee crashes the boat into a fueling station in the harbor and the two face off hand to hand, weak and tired from the chase. Wei wins the fight and throws Lee into an ice chipper. That's not a joke, that's how the main antagonist dies in this game. Following the big shootout and many explosions from the compound, Wei is arrested, but Raymond is on the scene to relieve him from police custody. Raymond fills in Wei that Pendrew has been promoted past the HKPD. He's now going to Interpol, far beyond their reach for them to take him down. When Wei gets home though, he receives a package from Broken Nose Zhang, addressed to him as Officer Shen. Inside the package is a recording of Pendrew visiting Uncle Po in the hospital and killing Po himself. Wei turns the footage into the police and Pendrew gets arrested. Pendrew's interrogation mirrors the opening of the game, though this time, Wei comes out on top entirely, telling Pendrew that he'll be spending his life in prison, or what little he'll have left once the Triad members inside get their hands on him. Wei meets with Detective Tang one last time, thanking her for her help, and Tang returns the sentiment. Tang has a brief personal aside to question Wei's loyalty, to the Triads or to justice. Newly, Chairman Zhang is revealed to be surveying Wei, and decides that since he technically remained loyal to her, he can be left alone to live his life. And after that, the credits roll. Now that the story recap is over, I want to restate my points about the issues with the pacing, as well as dig a little deeper into my issues with the structure of missions throughout the game while providing more clear examples here instead of breaking up the flow too heavily during the retelling. Firstly, I want to restate how incongruent it feels to play the police cases alongside main missions. We'll call these Triad missions because that's what they mostly are. The police cases feel like side content that's been upgraded to main mission status, with their disjointed narratives that, at best, have little tie-in into the Triad missions, and feel more like individual questlines that were written for their own section of storytelling. I mentioned it before, but the brief overlap early in the Triad mission with Winston's suspicion of Wei and the dealer bust is a great example of how these two narratives could and should have overlapped. After that point, the police cases are just roadblocks for the backend to trigger new Triad missions. There's no narrative connection and no real reason for the police cases to lock off the progression of Triad content, other than artificially extending the runtime of the main questline since now you have to go play cop for an hour. Speaking of playing cop, I think that the police cases becoming mandatory for progression is a direct response to how little Wei acts like a police officer in main missions. Yes, he tries to maintain evidence and keep casualties as low as possible, sometimes, but overall Wei is a loose cannon that definitely is more gangster than lawbringer, which is especially showcased throughout gameplay. There is a system for missions to reward you for playing into both sides of Wei's spectrum, a cop score and a Triad score. I want to more properly dig into this scoring later in the gameplay section, but just to bolster my point about Wei's leniency to the law, the cop rating is only a detractable score, meaning that you only ever lose points for doing unlawful actions, like driving recklessly or harming civilians. Meanwhile, the Triad rating is additive, going up for playing the game pretty much as intended, fighting enemies, getting headshots, and progressing through missions with the only paths presented to you. And now for the mission structure. The game has an endless stop-and-go attitude with what you'll be doing in main missions. They come through in a mostly chronological order, with very few missions being available simultaneously, which you could expect to showcase a constant rise of action or intrigue. Obviously, breaks from the rising tension are allowed and encouraged, but Sleeping Dogs constantly pulls you back from major plot points or resets the action meter to force you into weird and wacky objectives. For example, immediately following the cinematic and violent attack on Uncle Po in the hospital, the game decides to introduce you to Sonny Woe, who is, aside from his crimes and misdeeds that happen off-screen, effectively a joke on entertainment executives. On top of that, Sonny then sends you on a mission to entertain a client by singing karaoke and getting in a bar fight. Or instead of a tonal shift, let's take a look at two missions that appear one after the other to showcase another problem: the constant bungee jumping of stakes and Wei's importance in the gang. Following a chase with a rival gang member, Wei meets Broken Nose Zhang, a high-ranking official in the Sun on Yi who decides to trust Wei and let him in on her plan to take over as chairman of the Triad. Following this meeting, Wei decides to help Jackie get even on a personal deal that fell through. So is Wei suddenly part of a conspiracy to take over the Triad, or is he still hanging around foot soldiers like Jackie? Or what about when Uncle Po dies, which again is just relayed through a phone call? Suddenly Wei is bugging computers and sneaking around an apartment after helping put in motion the plan for the re-election of chairman. Missions constantly contradict the importance of one another, and again, I know a break in pace is okay, but when it's constant, it becomes a problem. These are just two missions I found in my notes really quickly. They actually appear pretty close to each other in the story too. It's a constant battle through the whole main questline, and the police cases further break up the mission structure and tone, leaving both up in the air whenever you start a mission. You never really know what you're walking into, which makes it difficult for me to always take the narrative seriously, even though the content of the story is mature, and I do mostly enjoy the ride it takes you on at the surface level. My last problem with the main story of Sleeping Dogs is its over-reliance on set-piece missions for the progression of content or the narrative. If you are unfamiliar, a set piece in a game is a scripted or heavily linear sequence that has the player engaging with over-the-top action or a cinematic presentation of gameplay that stands out from the usual gameplay experience. An easy example would be something like a needle drop mission, a scene or level that's set or backed to by a familiar or popular song. The back half of Sleeping Dogs is littered with these set-piece moments, like boat chases, high-rise brawls, funeral shootouts, grenade launcher defense sections, and more. These sequences are a staple of the crime sandbox genre. Every game has them, and they often become the most memorable parts of a title. With Sleeping Dogs, though, the constant barrage of trying to top itself just feels like action for the sake of action. The set-piece moments never end, and while I can understand the point might be trying to showcase how violent and extreme the Hong Kong Triad setting can be, it doesn't translate well to good mission design for me. If all I'm playing are explosive car chases that end with a shootout and a one-on-one fistfight, how will I know which one is the one? To sum everything up, the narrative in Sleeping Dogs is inconsistent. It has fun, energetic moments and emotional beats, but they get followed by joke characters and mandatory missions that are better off as distractions that create an overall uneven experience. On top of that, the flow of content and the progression of gameplay is constantly changing and feels inconsistent, leading to varied gameplay that doesn't feel like it belongs in the same line of missions. Or the mission structure tries to constantly top its own spectacle so that nothing feels important and that everything has this constant amateur film quality to stakes and tension, where every moment has to be bigger than the last. Where the inconsistent tone and flip-flopping between objectives would have taken me out of the experience normally, the core gameplay kept me playing to see the game through to its end. Sleeping Dogs has deceptively little to offer the player, but what you'll be doing throughout your 12 to 15 hour run with the game will at least be enjoyable most of the time. Let's start with the positives and work our way into aspects of gameplay that I didn't enjoy. First up, melee combat. This is likely what you're going to be spending most of your playthrough doing, and thankfully it's the most exciting and entertaining part of Sleeping Dogs. Melee combat revolves around unarmed martial arts employing light and heavy attack combos, grapples, counterattacks, and environmental attacks with a basic target lock-on system. The combos you can perform are based around a 5-hit light attack combo which you can shorten and empower by using heavy attacks, like leading with 2 light attacks and following with a heavy blow to perform the charged knee combo. Each of these combos can vary from dealing out consistent damage, creating space in fights, or even stunning enemies for powerful follow-up strikes. The combo system is simple, requiring the input of single clicks or button presses for light attacks and holding down the same input for heavy attacks, creating a coherent and easy to understand flow to create combos. The next major part of melee combat is countering. When an enemy attempts to strike Wei, the player is presented with an option to counter. The enemy flashes red, and with a single input, Wei counters their attack, opening them up for further attacks or stunning them long enough to focus on another enemy. The timing of countering is very generous, allowing the player to counter very early leading into an enemy attack or extremely late into the strike coming at Wei, creating a system that makes melee combat a little too easy in my opinion. I do think the countering timings were changed in the definitive edition, making them easier, so that could be the culprit if you think I'm crazy for saying it's too easy. Following counters, we have grapples. These allow Wei to break up combat by grabbing an enemy, effectively locking them down while Wei decides what to do next. While grappled, you can employ grapple combos, following the same rules as regular combos, or you can throw an enemy, forcing them onto the ground and dealing a bit of damage. Where grapples get a bit more exciting are environmental attacks. These are one-off finishers that Wei can employ when grabbing an enemy, using the environment to take an enemy out of the fight. These can range from giving your opponent a few cracked ribs to brutal, horrific, painful deaths that I wouldn't wish on anybody. Environmental attacks are mostly for the spectacle. They have a unique animation for each one, and they are usually flashy, over-the-top shows of force from Wei. On top of the hand-to-hand combat, occasionally Wei and enemies can employ melee weapons. Knives, swords, tire irons, purses, many other items that can be picked up can be used to thoroughly harm your opponents. They have very limited durability but are extremely effective, usually taking out enemies in just a few hits. Before we introduce any other moving pieces here, I want to say that I like the melee combat a lot. It's simple, flashy, and always feels fun to do, which is carried a lot by the animations for combat. We'll talk more about that later. I just wanted to restate that I enjoy the hand-to-hand combat in the game overall. Continuing with melee combat, the next piece of the puzzle is the face meter. The face meter is a gauge for how well you're doing in combat, essentially. It fills up as you hit enemies and fills even quicker if you employ varied combos and tactics, like switching from a grapple combo to beating an enemy with a fish, and the meter depletes as you take damage. When you fill the meter, you're rewarded with increased damage output, constant health regeneration, which is crucial because your health typically only fills back up to 50% of the base health bar, and you intimidate enemies. Intimidation is a weird mechanic that feels half-baked. How it works outside of the face meter is that whenever Wei performs a combo or action that enemies would consider intimidating, like the leg breaker combo, enemies will recoil and an animation for them will play, forcing them to stop fighting for a moment. While your face meter is full, any action has the chance to trigger intimidation for enemies, meaning enemies will more often be scared of Wei, allowing you to dig into them more because they'll be busy cowering in fear. I say it's half-baked because it kind of turns combat into a snooze fest when you fill up your face meter. Enemies will be intimidated so often that they'll forget to fight you and you'll be able to pick them off one by one, making fights feel even easier than they already do. I like the face meter overall. I think having a meter generate with varied combat is a great decision that naturally incentivizes the player into varied gameplay, which is always a plus. The health regeneration and intimidation bonuses are fine too, but the bonus to melee damage is the real winner for the face meter to me. It makes performing well in combat feel powerful and rewards you by making you even stronger. I think that about does it for the player's part in combat. Again, overall it's a very enjoyable combat system that feeds into the player's skill expression and always feels enjoyable to perform and participate in, if a little easy. Next, I want to talk about enemies in combat. Enemies come in a couple forms, which can be read as different fighting styles. First, we have basic enemies. These guys don't do anything special, they have attack combos, they can grab Wei, they're the most common enemy type, pretty much fodder enemies. And since they're pretty much basic enemies, next we have armed enemies. These are basic opponents that either enter the fight with a melee weapon or pick one up during the fight. They are identical to basic enemies in every way, other than being unable to grapple the enemy while they're armed. You can disarm them through a number of ways, or just beat them till they're down and drop the weapon. Next up, grapplers. These are enemies that cannot be grappled themselves but attempt to grapple Wei constantly, allowing other enemies to punish Wei or dealing out massive damage in a grapple throw. These enemies must be taken out by dealing heavy, consistent damage to them with heavy attack combos or melee weapons. Last up for our rogues gallery, the game has what they call brawlers. These are enemies that dish out heavy combos that are capable of consistently blocking Wei's attacks. The player must grapple a brawler to be able to damage them, forcing a grapple combo or throw and leading to more damage before they enter their defensive stance again. I like the enemy types available. I think they spice up the combat enough so that fights don't always feel the same, but they also don't ask the player to change their tactics too much so that combat drags out with you wondering what the most effective way to fight would be. I think a bit more variety in enemy types could go a long way to mix up the gameplay even more, like maybe an enemy that is capable of countering Wei, which asks the player to be mindful of who they're attacking in the middle of an engagement, or something like that. That was just my first thought. Where melee combat falls flat entirely are boss fights. These are enemies that the game deems important enough to be a boss, typically not giving the enemy any special moveset or ability. The only difference with boss enemies is that Wei cannot damage them without first countering a boss attack. So, boss fights end up being a waiting game of waiting for the boss to strike, countering, then doing a short enough heavy combo that won't be interrupted by the boss entering their defensive stance again, and repeating that flow until they're knocked out. These suck. I don't really have much else to say or any other way to put it. Every boss encounter in the game screeches to a halt and forces you to play in one specific flow for the entire encounter. They are the worst part of any mission or sequence, and I always dreaded getting through them because they're a chore. I honestly think a more engaging system for these boss fights would have been a scripted sequence, like quick-time events that focus on spectacle and presentation, maybe shifting the focus to some dialogue with the boss in a way. Otherwise, I don't know how the systems present could create engaging boss fights without a serious overhaul and introducing some unique mechanics. And I think that's all I have to say about melee combat in Sleeping Dogs. It's a fun, responsive, and fluid system that leads to engaging fights that could stand to be a bit more varied and difficult, but are otherwise consistently fun to get into. Except for boss fights, they're always boring and really need some improvement. The other most major part of gameplay is ranged combat, focusing around firearms. It takes a while in the main mission flow to get your hands on a gun, which I really like. It lets the melee combat breathe for a bit until your attention shifts to the ranged mechanics, which is a good thing because ranged combat leaves a lot to be desired. Shooting in Sleeping Dogs works as you'd expect it to in any other third-person shooter of the time. You get in cover, you peek out to shoot, enemies do the same, repeat till everyone's dead. But the devil is in the details here. The act of going through these motions never feels very good in Sleeping Dogs. At all times, with any of the weapons available to you, shooting feels very rigid due in large part to how tightly the camera gets when aiming down sights, and how quickly the perspective shifts to follow your crosshair. I don't want smoothed aiming or anything, but the camera movement feels about as bare bones as it could possibly get within the engine and the implementation. Another large part of why shooting feels so poor to me is the overall accuracy of guns while aiming. For some reason, each gun has a large amount of spread when aimed down sights, meaning the potential trajectory of your gun when firing can go in a pretty wide area. This leads to guns never feeling very accurate in firefights that have targets further than 20 feet away, which leads to them feeling ineffective. Another issue I have with ranged combat is how heavily it relies on the vault shooting mechanic that Sleeping Dogs has. When you vault over cover or jump from a higher area, if you aim your gun, you will enter a bullet time state, slowing down the world around Wei but allowing you to aim and fire in real time. Every single firefight seems to expect you to use and abuse this mechanic as a means to get the upper hand or even just to do it for the sake of it. It feels fun and flashy the first few times, but it is definitely overused and gets pretty old quickly. Even if you aren't using and abusing the bullet time mode, ranged combat never gets to a point where you have to engage with it on any meaningful level. At some point, when I realized how easily I could rip through enemies with any firearm, I stopped using cover entirely and just walked my way through any gun-based encounter, because the gunfights don't give you any reason to try and play it safe. I think a large part of this is the face meter gains you get during firefights, giving you that additional damage output and constant health regeneration. With the face meter active, Wei pretty much becomes RoboCop and any semblance of strategy in a firefight is out the window. Which is a shame, because I think there's clear incentive for ranged encounters to feel aggressive and fast-paced. Whenever you pick up a gun, you only have a few spare magazines to use until you either need to get ammo or swap to a new firearm. I think this is a direct expectation from developers to make the player act fast and aggressive when using firearms, quickly taking new guns from enemies and dishing out bullets as soon as you get them. I think in an ideal world, the ranged combat in Sleeping Dogs would have relied more heavily around this, the expectation that you don't have a gun for long, and when you do, your main goal is to get another one. The last thing I want to mention about guns in ranged combat is actually a positive. There are a surprising and refreshing variety to the guns in Sleeping Dogs. You have pump-action shotguns, automatic rifles, submachine guns, small caliber and large caliber pistols, and grenade launchers. It leads to firefights at least feeling different in small ways, but it also leads to there being clear winners in the cast of guns, like the submachine gun being an objectively worse pick than the assault rifle or a pistol. Oh, one other thing, because I don't really know where else to mention it. For some reason, you can't shoot bullets one at a time in this game. Every single gun, if you tap the fire button, you shoot 2 bullets minimum. It's a weird quirk. I made sure it wasn't my mouse or anything, I tried it with another mouse, I tried it with a controller, nothing. You almost always shoot 2 bullets. It's really weird. I think that does it for everything I want to say about combat in Sleeping Dogs. I guess it's a pretty mixed bag, given that one half of the combat encounters in the game are wonky due to some dated and awkward shooting mechanics. At least the melee combat is really fun and consistent, you know, when it's not a boss fight. Moving around the streets of Hong Kong also happens to come in 2 different forms. When you're on foot, the main way the game expects you to get around is through parkour or free running, whatever term you prefer. Wei is incredibly nimble, being able to vault, climb, slide, and jump his way through the city streets and across rooftops with ease. Moving around is pretty simple. You hold the sprint button to sprint, what a concept, and you press the button when performing parkour actions. Pressing the button in time with reaching an obstacle or prompt will have Wei seamlessly perform his stunt, like vaulting over a railing or sliding across a short wall. Reacting slowly with the parkour prompt will have Wei bump into a wall or otherwise stumble a bit on his execution, making you look like a loser and slowing down the pace of your run. Movement on foot is pretty rigid despite the free running basis. You're locked into canned animations for each stunt, and the dismount and entry of the stunt is entirely based on scripted activation points, like certain walls being scalable while others can't be climbed. I like the movement in its presentation. I think parkour in an open world space is almost always a positive, and Sleeping Dogs is no exception. Despite it being rigid and only possible in set locations, the stunts and actions are fast and snappy enough to feel satisfying to pull off, even if the variety is shallow. What I very much dislike about the movement is the constant slow-mo effect that happens whenever Wei does stunts. The game loves to slow things down and have action shots for Wei making large jumps or leaping down from high places. It happens constantly and definitely overstays its welcome throughout a playthrough. Overall, it's fine, and an enjoyable enough movement system for the game, if a little strict. The other half of movement would be the use of vehicles, allowing the player to drive cars, trucks, motorcycles, and boats. Driving is pretty straightforward, taking an arcadey approach to handling and physics that unfortunately leads to a lack of weight and heft to movement, making cars feel like toys when they impact more than anything. You can acquire vehicles a couple of ways, by stealing them off the street, breaking into parked cars, or buying one and retrieving the vehicle from a parking garage. You can even get a personal valet service eventually. There's a wide variety of cars and bikes on the road, ranging from a classic cruiser to a public minibus. They come in a couple different classifications, coming in A-Class, B-Class, and C-Class types. I think the classification only determines how fast the car can go, determining the max speed. I couldn't really tell the difference between the handling of a C-Class supercar or an A-Class, but the A-Class was definitely faster. Oh, and you can hire taxis to move around the map. It's the only means of fast travel in the game as far as I can tell, and it costs you a tiny amount of money. Not much to say. When you're in a car, you might get into some trouble. To deal with that trouble, you have a few options presented to you. There's vehicular combat, firing your gun while driving to take out enemies or disable their vehicle. Shooting out a tire immediately disables a car by causing them to crash, so that was my go-to option. You can also ram your vehicle into other cars, pressing the ram input and directional input to shift your car's weight and slam into another car. It's a fun mechanic, though a little inconsistent. Sometimes ramming will always knock cars out in 3 hits. Sometimes ramming a vehicle seems to do nothing. I could never tell why or when ramming an enemy would be effective, but when it works, it's fun and it comes with some exciting visual effects. Lastly, you can action hijack vehicles while driving on the road. Wei leans out of the driver's side door or perches on the back of a bike and leaps from his ride to another, landing on the vehicle and ejecting the driver, taking over at the wheel. It's a really fun gimmick mechanic, and it would probably look great if the camera ever cooperated when I tried it. I never got a good look at the action hijack. I remember doing it a lot when I played the game over a decade ago, so I'm sure this is just a PC issue, or an issue with the FPS, or some other rendering issue, but man, it never looked good. Boats drive like boats, they sure do glide across the water and turn horribly. No surprises and nothing really to add on their inclusion. They get used rarely, and you have no reason to use one outside of missions. I think that sums up everything I have to add about vehicles in Sleeping Dogs. They're a staple of the genre, so their inclusion is expected, and Sleeping Dogs doesn't do anything particularly interesting or disruptive to the formula. The additions with action hijacking and ramming are fun, but the inconsistency and poor presentation lead to a lack of desire to use the functions over alternatives like shooting out tires or just getting a new car on foot. All in all, getting around Sleeping Dogs is pretty par for the course for the genre, with a few extra additions for some extra flair in parkour and some excitement with vehicles. Nothing especially bad about any of it, but it's played pretty safe and strict to what the player can experiment with. Progression in an open-world crime sandbox can mean a lot of things. It can be a metric of how much wealth the player has, how many guns you have, how many cars you own, or what clothes you wear. All of that is true in Sleeping Dogs, but there's a few levels deeper as well with player skill progression. Let's start with the usual stuff: the money, the cars, and the clothes. Money in Sleeping Dogs is an interesting thing. As a reward for missions, it's next to meaningless since mission payouts are so low that you can't do anything with your ill-gotten gains. However, in the open world, there are many collectibles that give the player large cash injections that make the mission rewards meaningless. Around the city, you can find lockboxes, which can contain anything from $2,000 to $25,000. Mission payouts on average seem to be about $2,000, so walking around North Point for about 10 minutes, opening lockboxes and collecting the rewards nets you exponentially more money than missions ever will, which creates an awkward economy for completing missions. And that's just one collectible that nets you some income. But what are you spending your money on? Pretty simple answer actually. Clothes, cars, and gambling. We'll talk about gambling a bit more in the open world section of the video, so let's go into the other two. Purchases in Sleeping Dogs require two things: money and status, which is measured by your face level, another progression metric in the game. If you have enough money, you can buy something, but your face level needs to be high enough so that you can wear or represent your new clothes or toys. To gain face, you have to make a reputation for yourself, which can be achieved through side missions. Your face level also comes with some passive benefits for each rank, things like a personal valet for vehicles like I mentioned earlier, or heavy discounts on all purchasable items. Your face level is pretty hard to level up early on in the game, since I think it only goes up with open world gigs and you'll be pretty limited on those until you unlock certain activities. I think I like the face level as a whole, other than the needless roadblocking that it can cause when trying to get some new clothes early on. I like when a game expects the player to become a figure or gain notoriety in a way that is tangible to the player in the world, and I think the face level mostly succeeds at that by allowing you to purchase bigger and better things and the passive rewards that feel like Wei is more respected in Hong Kong. So, you have enough face to wear some nice new clothes. Well, what can you buy? A lot of options are available for Wei, from streetwear, athletic wear, and business attire. I like the customization available. I really enjoy expressing myself through clothes in games, and I like role-playing by switching out my outfit occasionally or getting new clothes as I progress in the world. There's also special outfits Wei can buy or earn. These can give you a gear set bonus like increased melee damage or even unlock entirely new combos and fighting styles. The outfits can be pretty wacky, most of which being references or homages to other pieces of media. I like these too. I can appreciate when a game doesn't take itself too seriously in every aspect, and some personality definitely shines through with the preset outfits. With cars, it's a lot simpler. Nicer, higher class cars cost more and require higher face levels. Pretty easy stuff. If you want a beater, you can buy one right out the gate. But if you want a souped up speed demon, start saving and make a name for yourself. I didn't buy too many cars because the game hands them out pretty frequently as mission rewards, and the vehicles that are given are pretty fast and look nice enough for me. But I'm sure someone appreciates the variety of cars on display here. I guess cars are the primary money sink for the game too, costing up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. An interesting metric of progression to me in the crime sandbox genre are player homes and safe houses. A safe house in the genre typically means a place where the player can save, maybe change clothes, store a car, or get some gear, and Sleeping Dogs is no different there. The progression of safe houses fascinates me though, as there's a lot said visually about where your character lives at certain points of the narrative. For example, here in Sleeping Dogs, Wei's first apartment looks like a hole in the wall, complete with stains and cracks on the walls and floor. Later in the game, once he's a high-ranking member of the Sun on Yi, Wei gets a luxurious apartment with an open floor plan, brand new appliances, and some boring abstract art to boot. Again, this is just a personal thing, but I love player homes in these games. I think it's a neat way to showcase progression and upward mobility in a game that goes underappreciated too often. Oh, and you can customize your apartment to a degree. Throughout the world, there are vendors that'll sell you random bits and bobs for your various apartments, like a coffee table or some art. I only found 2 of these guys naturally. They aren't marked on the map or anything, but it's a nice addition anyway. There are also street vendors throughout the world that allow you to purchase goods or services from, providing Wei with temporary buffs that help you out in the core gameplay, like increased face meter gains from massage parlors. I personally frequented the massage parlor a lot because the face meter is important and no other reason. The 2 other upgrade paths and progression trees rely on open world collectibles, those being health shrines and Zodiac statues. I'll speak more about collectibles later in the video, but just to cover my bases of talking about progression here, I'm going to briefly mention them now. Health shrines are pretty straightforward. You find 1, you pray at it, you find 5, you get a permanent health upgrade. There's 50 around Hong Kong, they're all over the place, and you can catch them pretty easily. The Zodiac statues are pretty hard to miss too, and thank God because they're your only source of upgrading your fighting style. Zodiac statues are 1-to-1 with your skill points you spend in the melee training upgrade tree, so you'll need 1 for each upgrade. There's 12 statues in total, 1 for each Chinese Zodiac sign, and again, you'll find them pretty easily. Okay, time for the big ones. Throughout the game, during main missions, you have 2 scores always keeping track of how you're playing the game, your cop score and your triad score, each having separate progression tracks tied to your scoring. I mentioned them earlier a bit in the narrative section, but these scores are important to progression for Wei. The cop score is a detractable score, meaning you start with the highest score possible and lose score for doing actions deemed unjust, like killing civilians or causing property damage. I find keeping your cop score high really annoying and makes playing through missions almost not fun, as if any slight hitch happens it can screw you out of a good rating. Like if you're driving suddenly and the NPC next to you decides to swerve into your lane, that's your fault and you're being deducted points, and losing out on XP towards the cop progression tree. Meanwhile, the triad score is extremely easy to gain and level, going up with any aggressive action that you do, which means most of the things that you do in main missions will net you a positive triad score, like performing action hijacks to steal a car or killing enemy gang members. Even just doing heavy attacks give you a triad score. It's a very uneven system that I think could have used some help on the cop end of things. An easy way to balance these out would have been to create ways to gain cop scoring, like taking out enemies in gunfights non-lethally, disarming them or injuring them but not quite killing them. Or even detracting from the triad score, maybe not using an obvious environmental kill during a set piece could detract some points. Obviously, detracting points feels a lot worse as a player, but I'm just thinking out loud about ways to make the system more balanced. With both the triad score and cop score, you gain levels for each by meeting certain point thresholds. With these levels, you gain skill points that can be spent in an individual skill tree, unlocking things like hollow point rounds for your gun for increased damage, or new techniques that can be used in melee combat. I think the triad skill wins here again, unfortunately, as most of the skills revolve around melee combat, which is something you'll engage with very often, while cop skills can be things like decreased wanted level gains or faster vehicle lockpicking, which, while useful, is objectively worse than new melee abilities. As a whole, I like the progression available to the player. It feels like there's a lot to accomplish while playing through Sleeping Dogs, but not too much to overwhelm the player. The progression also comes naturally through gameplay, like judging your performance on missions or cash gained through activities, which makes it easy to engage with and easy to keep track of. Or they're collectibles that reward you with powerful permanent bonuses that make tracking them down and scouring the map very worthwhile. Again, I wish cop skills and the point system were a bit more balanced and as powerful as the triad side of the spectrum, but I can see how creating opportunities for cop XP gain in the main story would be difficult with the primarily gang-focused missions. Though unfortunately, it falls to the player to make extra effort to gain cop XP for unsatisfactory rewards. Shigo Kung Fu de Kaijan Shiv. Excuse me. I don't know what just happened. Anyways, the open world presented in Sleeping Dogs, the city of Hong Kong, is par for the course with its contemporaries in the genre, if anything a little lacking. You have random encounters, small gigs, short quest lines, collectibles, some mini games, and distractions around the city. Let's start with the most substantial content and work our way down into the lesser activities. The first bit of side content I want to talk about are the date missions that Wei can have with a couple of women he meets around the city. Just like dating in real life, you have your racing girlfriend, your karaoke girlfriend, your parkour girlfriend, a photography girlfriend, and a hacking girlfriend. At least I think that's all the girlfriend types, at least until the firmware update women are getting next year. Each one of these women are met through main progression in the main story, but pursuing them and completing their missions is entirely optional to the player. The content of the missions are pretty minimal, like completing a street race for Sandra or taking photos of Amanda at a park. The real reason date missions stand out to me are the dialogue Wei has with some of the girls. I mentioned it a bit earlier, but Wei sounds like a human being when he's on dates. He talks to these women in a sense that's outside of his triad or police life, and it's refreshing to see another side of Wei. Now, your satisfaction with the dialogue might vary, but the mission rewards for completing dates are definitely worth your time. For each date, you're rewarded with a different collectible becoming permanently visible on your map, making your hunt for lockboxes and health shrines much easier. Pretty nifty reward for 5 minutes of lackluster gameplay. Oh, and you get a little innuendo from Wei's girlfriends and a cut to black while Wei and company make some silly sounds. Very classy and mature, very 2012. Next up for our side content, let's go over the police content available in the open world. We've got two options, drug busts and cop jobs. Drug busts are multi-step activities where you find a group of guys hanging out in the city, beat them up, and hack into a camera nearby. With the camera hacked, you can head back to any of Wei's apartments and access the CCTV on his computer. From the camera, you're asked to identify a drug dealer and have him arrested on the spot, netting some cop XP and some cash for the player and cleaning up the streets of Hong Kong. Cop jobs, originally part of the SWAT DLC in the base game, now integrated smoothly into the Definitive Edition's open world, are very simple and quick bursts of police content for the sake of cop XP and money. The jobs consist of arresting some robbers, stopping a street race, or otherwise putting an end to some tomfoolery. These only take a few moments to complete and are otherwise not worth your time unless you're really hurting for some cop XP. Next up, we have the Supercar questline, featuring the DZS-90, a cranked-up sports car with an EMP, mounted Gatling guns, and more. It's a line of missions to showcase each piece of equipment, incrementally upgrading the car until it's given to Wei for the player to use at any time. I never finished the questline. I didn't really care about the car, and to me, it seemed like it would make an otherwise easy game even easier. It's a cool car, the upgrades are pretty fun, and they're unique, but I didn't feel like it was worth my time personally. Moving along, we have contract jobs for Roland Ho, a minor character in the main campaign. Calling Roland, we can pick up some debt collection gigs. These vary with how Wei collects these debts, chasing down people over rooftops or just shaking them down at their place of work, but are otherwise quick jobs for an influx of cash. There's only 5, one of them is a repeat offender that you collect from twice, and they're pretty forgettable. Lastly, we have favors. These are quick odd jobs from citizens around the city, and the objectives they put you through vary more than other content. Someone stops Wei on the street and they'll ask you to do anything from a protection gig, act as a driver, or even just some simple photography for a graphic designer. These net you a lot of face XP early on, so I think these are probably the most worthwhile content available. Plus, they're not too serious most of the time and have a lighthearted tone, which makes the random nature of their objectives land a lot easier. And that's it for the scripted content in the open world, an extremely underwhelming breadth of content that gives you rewards that don't really result in anything meaningful, other than the date rewards. Those are pretty good. The money given from these jobs is negligible from cash drops and collectibles, again, we'll get to those in a second, and the cop XP, like we mentioned earlier, isn't worth your time as the cop upgrades aren't really that great either. I think the contract missions from Roland also give you Triad XP, but you should have plenty of that from the main missions. The face XP from favors is pretty worth your time, again at least in the early game when face gains are hard to come by and you can't do like street racers or the martial arts tournaments. Past the scripted content, there are a couple of distractions and random things to get into and mess around with in Hong Kong. Let's dive right in. The most engaging, I think, are the martial arts tournaments found around each neighborhood of the city. These are endurance tests for the player's skill in the melee combat system, placing the player against multiple enemies through multiple rounds, increasing the number of enemies until completing 6 rounds total. Completing the tournament awards Wei with some money, some face XP, and outfits based around martial arts. Again, like I mentioned earlier in the combat section, the melee combat is pretty easy, so these tournaments aren't super difficult to complete, but the combat is still fun, so it's engaging enough to complete these. Following the MMA tournaments, we have street races. Pretty self-explanatory. Wei enters a street race based around a certain vehicle type and the vehicle class rank, all races being a checkpoint-based single lap, expecting the player to place first to complete the race. You gain money for winning the race, and a lot of face XP. These were my #1 way to gain face in the mid-game, so I completed a good handful of these. I don't care much for driving or racing in most games, and as I mentioned earlier, Sleeping Dogs doesn't do anything special with driving, so these aren't really worth your time past the face XP to me. Next we have karaoke.
I've been shopping all day, my legs hurt.
Yep. And next we have cockfights.
Smart man, you win.
Yep. And lastly, for tangible side content, we have Mahjong Poker. I think it follows the same rules as poker, asking the player to get better hands based on the poker rule set, but using Mahjong tiles instead of poker cards. It's fine, I like gambling, maybe a little too much, but I didn't play much of this because, again, money was made frivolous through collectibles. I like stakes with my gambling. I want to lose it all and find myself coming down from the ledge just to play another hand. Speaking of those collectibles, let's go right into what you can find around Hong Kong. Since I keep complaining about the economy, I'll start with the biggest offender, red envelopes. This was a DLC in the original release, but with the definitive edition, these envelopes are all over the city. Each envelope you find gives you $50,000, more than almost any mission reward in the game, aside from I think the finale of the main campaign. Obviously, you can opt out of picking these up, but the moment you do pick one up, your cash flow is immediately imbalanced because you just got a surge of $50,000. Why the hell would I do these favors for 200 when I can just hunt down an envelope and get all the clothes I want? I think avoiding these envelopes might make progression feel better throughout the game. I say I think because the envelopes aren't the only thing making you an overnight millionaire. I mentioned them in detail earlier, but lockboxes are also placed all around the world, tempting you to open them to receive direct deposits of up to 20,000 HKD, again making mission rewards seem small and pointless. I don't really understand the reasoning for the extreme payouts on either of these collectibles. With lockboxes, I assume they made the payouts so high to incentivize you to track them down, since only getting a few $100 would probably stop you from opening another lockbox your entire playthrough. The red envelopes were originally a post-launch DLC, so maybe they were a response to poor mission payouts from the main story and side missions. So I understand why they give you so much money, but I guess I struggle with the point of mission payouts at all if collectibles are going to be your best source of income. Next for collectibles, we have health shrines. Again, I mentioned these earlier in the progression portion of the video since these are your only source of increasing your max health. Just to be thorough, again, you can find 50 of these shrines all over the map. Find 5 and you get a 10% increase to your max health. The incentive for finding these is obvious. Health increases are good and you'll probably want them, so I kinda don't have a lot to say about these. They're a good collectible, being something relating to the culture and world of Sleeping Dogs, and they're helpful to the player. No negative marks from me. Last collectible on the list, we have the Zodiac statues again. I also mentioned these earlier in the progression section, but in case you forgot, you can find Zodiac statues to gain skill points to spend on the melee training skill tree. On top of giving you the new melee abilities, you also get a brief voiceover with Wei and his kung fu teacher, Sifu Kwok. In these voiceovers, you get a little more exposition and understanding of Wei and his struggle with being part of the Triad, with Sifu Kwok questioning his allegiances and purpose in the gang, saying that the Wei Shen that he knows has a good heart. You can find these statues and return them in any order for these voiceover scenes, but I think they play in a linear order to slowly reveal more about Wei, so there's a decent narrative reason to turn in the statues on top of the obvious gameplay benefit. Another part of the open world gameplay loop I want to mention is the heat system, or the wanted system. It works exactly as you'd expect, gaining heat levels for committing crimes and losing the heat as you evade the police pursuit. It goes up through 5 levels, increasing the police response with each and giving the player a higher challenge as you gain heat. I don't really have much else to say about the heat system. It works as you'd expect, and it's entirely optional to the player in the open world sandbox. I don't think I ever really gained heat without going out of my way to do so now that I think about it. You only gain heat if you're acting extremely aggressive or doing something illegal in the view of a police officer. I don't really know where else to mention these, so the open world section seems like a good enough fit. Throughout the game, in missions and the open world, you'll encounter a lot of little minigame mechanics to represent actions like lockpicking, hacking, and matching signal frequencies. Each of these come up in their own dedicated menu in the UI, and they have unique games to complete the interaction. They're all very simple and will be completed in just a few seconds, but I like their inclusion. They break up the gameplay enough and are placed in enough variety that they never feel cumbersome or that you're doing a specific minigame too often. I think I do actively dislike the hacking interaction. It's just a simple guessing game to guess 4 digits in a sequential order, and I just think it's kind of lazy and boring. But again, it's over within a couple seconds, so I wasn't annoyed for too long. The last system present in the open world that I want to talk about are the open world challenges and the leaderboard. While you're moving through the city, participating in anything, you'll occasionally trigger a prompt for a high score relating to what you're doing, like getting a headshot streak in a firefight. These scores are synced to your friends list, and you're kept on a leaderboard against how your friends perform at these various little objectives. I like these a lot. They're fun, small ways to incentivize the player to fight better or drive safer, and it's a good time. It's nothing serious, just bragging rights with your friends that might have played a 10-year-old game, but it's a very simple inclusion to keep you on your toes. I really like these, and I wish these popped up more in single-player games similar to this, if they're as unobtrusive as they are here. I think that sums up the open world gameplay in Sleeping Dogs. It's a pretty uneven display of intrigue and entertainment, really varying on how much you buy into the character of Wei Shen or how much you enjoy mindless filler content in a sandbox game. Like I mentioned, I really enjoy the content that fleshes out Wei as a character, the dates and the Zodiac statue collectibles specifically, and unfortunately I think that's where my interest and enjoyment ends. Most of the content is undermined by collectibles or just not engaging enough to warrant you going off the beaten path of the main story to give it a shot, unless you need some face XP to buy a new shirt or something. All in all, it's a pretty underwhelming world to play in, and I don't think it adds very much to the game as a whole, and it especially doesn't make Sleeping Dogs stand out in the genre. Sleeping Dogs tries to take a realistic approach to its visuals, attempting to present the world and its characters in a believable way through realistic and natural renders. I think, for the most part, Sleeping Dogs passes in this regard, with some exceptions. Starting with the exceptions, I think the faces of character models are extremely dated even when compared to the game's contemporaries at the time. Everyone kind of has this muddied, rough texture to their face, and no one looks quite human, kind of giving off a plastic look. I think this is unfortunately most prominent with our main character, Wei. His face always seems slightly off, kind of rough but smoothed over. I can't really explain it, but it doesn't seem right just looking at him in motion. This issue applies to every character in the game, but obviously we'll be looking at Wei a lot, so I think he's a great example to showcase it. Despite the muddied faces, character models look great. I think their bodies and clothing were strangely rendered in much higher detail, or were held to a higher standard because everyone looks great from the neck down. Clothing is sharp and detailed, characters wear layers, and outfits have distinct personalities, even having a couple model swaps for some of the major players in the story. They look great, and it extends to the clothing for Wei, which makes buying clothes even more enjoyable. Continuing with our human characters, let's talk about their animation. In cutscenes, characters move in a believable, realistic way, and everything looks nice, no marks against it. It looks like most cutscenes, if not all, were motion captured, so that makes a lot of sense. Outside of proper cinematics though, canned animations are constant, with characters warping into and snapping through animation sets to display while speaking. It looks really bad, and easily dates the game. Animations through gameplay though are mostly great. While fighting, Wei moves like a well-oiled machine, flawlessly executing his moves and definitely playing it up for the camera with some exaggerated presentation and purpose to his action. And this level of care extends to enemy animations too. Everything is exaggerated and fun. It looks like there was a lot of care put into how characters move when they're fighting. Unfortunately, outside of fights, things continue to look a little rigid and stilted. Parkour animations are tight and force Wei into exact positions needed to perform his actions, like locking Wei in place when he slides or warping Wei into position for a big jump. Continuing through smaller, more intimate things, I think cars thoroughly look and animate well for a lot of different shapes and sizes. I'm not a car guy by any means, but they all look believable and have soft bodies to simulate damage to the vehicle, which looks pretty good for the time. Something that looks less than stellar are guns, both their models and animations. The guns look really big, like oversized toys. I've held a good number of guns myself in my life, and while they are hefty, these look like theater props more than anything. And it doesn't help that they all have this silver sheen to them, looking like flat matte objects all with the same color and painting. It looks pretty bad. Their animation sets don't help their case either, animating pretty simply and coming across dated. Reload animations are pretty good though, pretty consistent and accurate, I think. Moving on to the macro scale to talk about how the world and environments look, I think Sleeping Dogs holds up pretty well. Again, everything is rendered in a realistic way, but there are some considerations taken to add some style or flair to the world that help the game look great. One that is immediately noticeable is the overabundance of visual effects, like sparking neon signs or puffs of dust coming from punches landing on enemies. The effects are over the top and all over the place, but it really is for the benefit of the visual styling, making everything look exciting and fun. This extends to lighting in scenes and environments as well. Everything is bathed in neon or drenched in exaggerated color to help set the mood or feeling of a place in the world. It all feels purposeful and intimate, like someone really cared about what mood the city conveys, which only gets accentuated and pushed even further when it rains. Man, the rain looks unreal for a game from 2012. The world and city of Hong Kong are extremely detailed and have a lot of little extras to help sell the believability of everything. You can find trash blowing through the street, lanterns swaying in the wind, rain spilling out of waterspouts, and it all adds to the world, selling you on the presentation of the city to feel more alive. And NPCs go the extra mile in adding to the life of the city, reacting to weather, interacting with the environment, having tasks or little animations for specific actions. Everything feels alive and in motion, and it's all in great show for the time. Which extends to a little tangent I want to speak about regarding Sleeping Dogs and other titles. Virtual tourism. The term sounds pretty straightforward. Tourism in a virtual space or world, but I think there's more to it that Sleeping Dogs and other games can really nail. Obviously, cities and places can't be rendered one-to-one with a real-life counterpart, but when a city like Hong Kong is selected for a setting, developers have to go an extra mile in selling the setting to two crowds: people that live in or have been to Hong Kong and people that have never been to the city. I think Sleeping Dogs nails its attempt in simulating Hong Kong, creating cramped streets and crowded markets, beautiful gardens and towering cityscapes, all with a distinct Chinese influence on the architecture and design. It's a wonderful render of the city. As far as I know, I've never been there, and I really do feel like I'm in an unfamiliar foreign environment compared to something like Liberty City or another American-based metropolis, something that games can achieve in a way that I think goes underappreciated far too often. Obviously, visiting somewhere like Rome is a real physical experience, and getting to look up at the Sistine Chapel is something I want to do myself in my life, but being able to emulate something like that experience or visual even to a small degree is impressive, and should be applauded more in titles like Sleeping Dogs. The last thing I want to mention about the visual presentation in Sleeping Dogs is the consistent filmic approach to cutscenes that the game displays. Cutscenes are littered with top-notch cinematography that elevate the visual language to another level, appearing more professional than a traditional shot-reverse shot cutscene that other games might use. This is something that's become more common in games recently, but for 2012, this was a pretty big upgrade for a game in the genre. I like this a lot. I appreciate when games try to replicate the feeling of watching a movie with their cinematics, since that's all you're really doing when you're watching a cutscene, and when done correctly, I think it really pays off. The cinematic presentation of cutscenes leads us nicely into talking about the audio of the game, specifically starting with the voice cast. The voice cast for characters throughout Sleeping Dogs is stacked. I mean, seriously, United Front Games went all out on voice actors in the game, hiring professional Hollywood-tier actors for Wei and a couple of other people throughout the game. Wei Shen is portrayed by Will Yun Lee, known for many roles across television and film, and he delivers a great performance for the game.
They attacked us. Seems to me you could use some better help.
Wei comes across as a confident gangster and intelligent investigator, all with his charisma cranked up to 11. A few other characters feature some famous names, like Emma Stone playing Amanda Cartwright, Lucy Liu as Vivian Liu, Tom Wilkinson playing Detective Pendrew, and James Hong as Uncle Po, just to name a handful of the most familiar faces. I think everyone delivers a great performance, those I just listed and most other characters throughout the game as a whole. The voice acting definitely brings the presentation of the game to another level, helping it stand out from other games at the time in a very strong, powerful way that has a lot of staying power. Which leads me to a big topic I want to talk about regarding this entire video and my replaying of this game. I think the presentation on display, with cutscenes mimicking films and the voice actors being professional television and film actors, makes the entire package extremely memorable and elevated Sleeping Dogs to another echelon for games in 2012. Along with the above-average melee combat, the strong voice acting and presentation throughout the story were the main aspects of Sleeping Dogs that I remembered and have held in a high regard for the past decade. And I think that might be the case for a lot of people reminiscing about the game. It's an interesting thing, the fact that some powerful, very strong aspects of the game can overshadow otherwise middling and boring parts in the open world and story. My goal with mentioning this isn't to dissuade anyone from liking the game or to change anyone's mind on how they feel, but I do want to bring it up to maybe help someone re-examine their thoughts on Sleeping Dogs and look past the Hollywood frosting for the rest of the cake. Moving on to the rest of the audio, I don't really have much to say about the sound effects or music in the game because Sleeping Dogs doesn't give me much to go off of. And before you get up in arms about the music, I know you were scrolling down to leave a comment. Yes, the main menu themes are undeniably certified bangers. The piper, a traditional Chinese stringed instrument set to a rap beat with a chill bass line underneath, yeah, it's great. Some of the other main menu themes are pretty good too, like I said, this one's just the one that I like the most. But any other track in the game is extremely forgettable and feels generic to fit whatever scenario it might fit, like a combat track or a song for chases. On top of that, I don't think music plays outside of missions or activities, which just kind of bolsters my point about the music feeling forgettable since it's not going to be playing outside of scripted content. I could be wrong about this, but I noticed a lack of music when I was going through the open world content, and when I tried to investigate it further, it definitely seemed like there's nothing playing. Which I believe is caused by the need for licensed music that plays over the radio when you're driving through the city, taking the place of what could be playing while you're in the car. I don't really have much to say about this music. There's a couple of stations for different genres of music, and yeah, it sure is music. It's not like any of this was made for the game, as far as I know. It was just chosen by someone to fit the setting and time period from already existing music. One station is specifically tracks made for the game, but to me it's just some generic house mixes that don't do much for me. I didn't listen to it very much. Except for this one, it comes on all the time in karaoke bars and it got very stuck in my head. I would be embarrassed to admit how many times I listened to that song while writing this script. As for sound effects in the game, I think they're fine, leaning towards pretty good. For example, sound effects in fights have an exaggerated weight to them, like dramatic impact sounds for melee combat. And I think that's a fun addition to help fights feel more exciting or impactful. Otherwise though, sound effects are pretty standard, nothing too out of the norm, and it keeps the game feeling believable and natural. I do want to mention that guns feel a little muted. It's a weird discrepancy in otherwise standard fare audio, but not worth holding it against the game or anything. Before we get into my closing thoughts for the game as a whole, there's a few sizable DLCs, or downloadable content packs, that I'd like to mention in their own section as they're a bit more worthwhile past collectibles that ruin the economy or jobs that feel like busy work. Mostly. I played these in a random order, but I think when I played them was correct, or at least what the developers would have intended, I think. Each DLC is a mostly independent story or sequence that takes place outside of the main campaign, so it felt appropriate that I talk about them outside of the core of the game. First up, we have the Zodiac Tournament DLC. The Zodiac Tournament DLC is accessible at any point in the base game after you unlock it through story progression. It's a unique objective found in the harbor across from the island where the expansion takes place. You're warned about starting the DLC too early if the game deems you underpowered. I don't know what the cutoff for the intended power level was, but I got this message and breezed through the content just fine. Skipping the warning message, you'll be greeted with a stylish, funky film intro straight out of the 1970s, mimicking the presentation of movies at the time, which sets the tone for the entire expansion. The Zodiac Tournament DLC does not take itself serious whatsoever, which I appreciate. I miss a time where DLC content could be fun, wacky adventures simply for the player's enjoyment, rather than large-scale expansions that need to meet or exceed the expectation built by the base game. Don't get me wrong, I love a good Phantom Liberty or Shadow of the Erdtree, but I do miss the early 2010s era of silly content expansions. Following our opening sequence, Wei disembarks from a ferry and steps onto a new island, and we're set into a mostly linear sequence through to the final mission, which I don't mind. I like that this DLC has a short, focused story to tell. Wei climbs up some stairs, reaching a temple, and we're greeted to the organizer of the event, a Dr. Zhang, laying out the rules and giving some exposition to the player that everyone gathered here is considered to be the best of their respective martial art, and that now they're expected to fight to the death. We can speak to each fighter, learning a tiny bit about them and getting a vibe check on their personalities, most of them being aggressive and dismissive of Wei. Once we're tired of the meet and greet, we can begin our first challenge, the qualifying round. This is just a gauntlet fight for Wei. Presumably the other contestants are doing the same, but as the player, you just fight a couple waves of basic enemies. Following the qualifier, Wei is expected to traverse over and through the island to the next arena, which can potentially lead us into finding a collectible unique to the Zodiac Island. Fire opal statues. These are probably my favorite collectible in the DLCs, but that isn't saying much. When you pick these up, you get a brief blurb from a narrator telling the player a little about a fighting style we'll see on the island. It's not much information, but it's something to make picking these up a little worth your time if you're at all interested. There's 12 statues in total, and if you find them, you'll get a damage increase when wearing 2 outfits in the base game, as well as unlocking unique grapple moves, again exclusive to the outfits. Pretty lackluster in my opinion, but at least it's better than some stuff we'll see in other expansions. Anyways, while running across the island, Wei will encounter traps and obstacles that are quick-time events and little gotcha moments for the player. I don't have much to say about them, they're fine, if a bit annoying since their placement doesn't seem to have any indication for you to avoid them. Next up, we fight at a cliffside arena. It's a free-for-all between Wei and some other contestants. Whoever is standing last moves on to the next challenge. Obviously, that's going to be us, so we're moving right along. A quick run through the jungle with some pungy board decor, and we meet Little Fu, a spectator and sister to one of the contestants, who greeted us earlier when we arrived. She offers Wei some tea to help with the next challenge, and it turns out to be poisoned. Wei has to fight off an ambush while the screen turns blue and shakes a little. I don't think you're actually at a disadvantage while poisoned. Wei continues to the next fight against an American boxer, I think, and the screen gets bluer and shakes more while you beat this guy too. Following this fight, Wei seems to have passed out and is woken up by another contestant, telling Wei that he thinks some flowers local to the island could help fight the poison's effect. A quick jaunt over to the flowers and Wei is back in fighting shape, heading off to the final event. Wei meets the remaining contestants for another gauntlet fight, facing off against some standard enemies until they're all defeated. With the chumps out of the way, the tournament master announces that it's time for the final fight, against each other. The contestants and Wei have decided that they're sick of the games and sick of the island, so they band together to tell Dr. Zhang that they're not fighting each other. Zhang accepts this, then activates a descending ceiling full of spikes, accepting their offer or, again, telling them to fight amongst themselves. The men stand against Zhang as he sends in more goons, forcing the player and other contestants to throw their enemies into the large mechanisms controlling the ceiling, leading to a bloody race against the clock. The men decide that they will fight each other, but not kill one another, and that the last man standing will go fight Zhang to put a stop to the Zodiac Tournament. I like this fight a lot. It's a unique display of the mechanics we're already familiar with, and it adds some tension with the falling ceiling to keep the player on their toes. Winning the fight, Wei chases Zhang. Wei chases Zhang. Wei chases, Wei chases Zhang. Wei chases Zhang to stop him from putting any more fighters through his game. The chase is insane. It goes through the same path we've already run down, but it seems like Zhang is literally summoning lightning strikes to hit Wei and stop him from following. It's absolutely insane, and it fits the otherwise goofy vibe of the DLC so far. I really like it. After catching up to Zhang, we get a final boss fight to close out the DLC. If you remember what I said about boss fights earlier, unfortunately they forgot to improve them at all for this fight. So yeah, it's a pretty boring dance of waiting for Zhang to strike, countering, hitting him 3 times, and repeat, repeat, repeat. Zhang himself has a unique fighting style. He forces Wei to dodge, leading to a quick time event, and counters Wei's grapples, so there is a little bit of diversity to this one, but the flow of the fight is otherwise the same. When defeated, Zhang tries to buy Wei off and buy his life from Wei, trying to pay him over 25 million US dollars. Wei isn't here for the money anymore, killing Zhang and closing out the DLC with a funky stinger. That's it for the Zodiac Tournament DLC. From my recording, it looks like it was about 40 minutes of content, cutscenes included. So, I don't know, take that as you will. It's an over-the-top homage to kung fu movies of the past, most notably Enter the Dragon, and it's a fun little romp through some of the more difficult fights you'll find in the game. Not any real difficulty to really spice things up, but definitely harder than most of the base game. I appreciate its inclusion as part of the Definitive Edition package, but I don't know if I would have been too happy with this purchase with the original release. DLC was weird 15 years ago, so I don't know, this was kind of par for the course, but still, 40 minutes, 4 fights, and some silly cutscenes? I guess I do buy Fortnite skins that cost more than this DLC ever did, so who am I to judge? The next DLC we're going to cover is The Nightmare in North Point. This is an instant, separate experience from the main campaign, requiring you to launch it individually from the base game on the main menu. Starting it up, we're greeted with a narrator telling us about the Chinese folklore of the Zhangxi, or the hopping vampires. We then see Wei and Na Ping, a girlfriend from the base game, walking and talking on a date, seemingly coming out of a movie based around the Zhangxi. The two meet Uncle Salty, who warns Wei and Na Ping about disrespecting the Zhangxi since tonight feels extra spooky. Salty is proven right as a spirit pops up right next to the group, kidnapping Na Ping while taunting Wei and the Sun on Yi. Wei chases the spirit until the spirit binds Uncle Salty with some magic and summons real-life Zhangxi to stop Wei. Fighting the Zhangxi is a bit unique. They don't get knocked out through consistent damage, instead forcing the player to grapple them once they're stunned, instantly banishing them. They're otherwise simple opponents and will act as our basic enemies for this expansion. I appreciate the change of pace while fighting the Zhangxi, and the mix-up to melee combat will continue as we meet more enemies. On top of changing the flow of combat, the Zhangxi look great. They have creepy, glowing eyes, pale blue skin, they hop around and move unnaturally with the lower halves of their bodies staying stiff while they fight. It's great. I love the extra effort here in making these enemies stand out. After banishing all the Zhangxi around Uncle Salty, Wei frees him from his magical binding and continues after the spirit that kidnapped Na Ping. I missed this in my recording. I paused the game and just started running around once I unpaused, but Uncle Salty clues Wei into who the spirit is. A long-dead man named Smiley Cat. Chasing the spirit, more Zhangxi are summoned and Wei saves some civilians from similar rituals that Uncle Salty was trapped in. Wei eventually catches up to Smiley Cat and finds not being bound like Uncle Salty was. Wei fights some more Zhangxi while Smiley Cat continues to taunt Wei, until intervening and proving to be too powerful for Wei to stop. Wei gets a call from Salty to head over to the Golden Koi right away, so we head off to do so. In the restaurant, we're greeted by Vincent, a minor character from the base game who died during one of the police cases. Vincent is a spirit visiting from beyond, cluing Wei into some of what's happening around Hong Kong. For now, he lets Wei know that something's happening out back and continues to eat some soup. When we get out to the back lot, we are greeted by a Yao Guai, a powerful Chinese demon. Attempting to fight the Yao Guai proves to be useless as Wei can't land a single hit, phasing through the demon every time he strikes. Salty calls out to Wei, saying that the demon is too powerful for him, and the demon thankfully lets us walk away to speak to Salty about what to do next. Salty refers Wei to a local tea maker who brews a special magic tea for fighting demons. Wei is still not taking anything serious or believing what's going on, but I do like that every other character in the DLC plays it straight the entire time, as if what's happening is like any other day. I hop into a car to head over to the apothecary for some magic tea, and Vincent greets us in the passenger seat, giving us a little more exposition about Smiley Cat. Apparently, Smiley Cat was a member of the Sun on Yi, until Uncle Po had him killed for being out of line back in the day, and now he's back to take over the 18K triad and take out the Sun on Yi. Wei reaches the apothecary with a tea maker and frees him from a Zhangxi ritual. The tea maker tells Wei that he'll need 3 special ingredients for the magic tea: a ghost pepper, the egg of an albino hen, and some antifreeze. This sends us on a little tour around North Point, which lends itself nicely to talking about the side content available in this expansion. Throughout the DLC, we're given the opportunity to stray away from main objectives, driving through the North Point district to banish the Jiangshi at their portals, fight Yao Guai, and free captive citizens, all of which are brief independent fights that reward the player with preset outfits and cars that can only be used in the DLC instance. Meaning there's next to no real reward for the base game, with nothing carrying over to the base game for us to work towards. I think this makes them effectively pointless. You get rewards to use exclusively in this hour-long side story that doesn't add anything to the base game. I think focusing the DLC to just the main missions like the Zodiac Tournament did would have helped the expansion feel more focused and not create this issue of side rewards being pointless. Other than the independent brawls you can find, you might also find a new collectible, Hell Money Shrines. This again is independent and unique to the DLC, granting you an additional buff to activating your face meter, giving Wei the chance to set enemies on fire with his strikes as the face meter is active. It's fine, I wouldn't want this ability outside of the DLC as it'd probably make easy fights even easier, so I don't have anything to detract from the Hell Money Shrine inclusion. Once we've gathered the ingredients for our magic tea, the tea imbues our standard face meter with magic properties, becoming a magic meter for the remainder of the DLC. Now, once the face meter is active, Wei's fists glow blue with a magic fire, allowing him to strike Yao Guai and take out the Jiangshi without needing to perform a grapple finisher. It's a fun effect, it looks flashy and stylish, and proves to be powerful with letting you bypass the grapple attack. With the Yao Guai behind the golden koi defeated, we can continue our pursuit of Smiley Cat. We find him riling up some possessed 18K members and interrupt his sermon, and leading to a car chase to find where the 18K are gathering for Smiley Cat. We fight some more possessed thugs, Jiangshi and Yao Guai, and we're introduced to the Jiangshi portals, requiring Wei to grapple Jiangshi and bring them to the portal to banish them and seal the gateway. These mostly artificially extend fights, but I don't mind their inclusion. They spawn more Jiangshi until you deal with the portal, and it gives you a little more to consider while you're beating up baddies. Following the chase and the fights, Smiley Cat resurrects some of the antagonists from the main story, most notably Dog Eyes. This doesn't really mean or do anything narratively, it just gives Wei 3 separate objectives to tackle and some more banter between Wei and the opposition. With the last of the 3, Wei interrogates him to find out how to stop Smiley Cat. The spirit reveals that Uncle Po kept Smiley Cat's pinky finger up in the temple in North Point to ensure that his spirit never got a full eternal rest. So our next objective is to burn the pinky finger and finally banish Smiley Cat to an eternal rest in hell once his material form is gone from Earth. Reaching the temple, Wei finds Not Ping, again being strung up by demonic magic and asking Wei to save her. Smiley Cat stands by to taunt Wei and summon some more demons for Wei to fight. We fight the Jiangshi, we fight some Yao Guai, close some portals, and Smiley Cat is ready to face Wei himself. Mechanically, he's just like a Yao Guai, only being able to damage him while the face meter is active, so we beat him up just like one of them, requiring no special effort. With Smiley Cat beat finally, Wei approaches the altar where his pinky finger has been preserved, tossing it into a nearby fire and banishing him to hell permanently. Wei and Not Ping leave the temple, and we get a dramatic reveal that Not Ping is still possessed by some demons as the expansion wraps up. And that's it for the Nightmare in North Point DLC. It's a fun and enjoyable experience. I like the inclusion of traditional Chinese folklore in the game. I think it's really cool that United Front Games decided to include a deeper cultural backdrop for the setting of this DLC, and I enjoy the overall tone of the experience. It's mostly laughing along with the player while Wei plays the straight man to the joke, not quite on board with what's going on. The open world content, the lackluster side activities, were definitely a miss for me, but I completed all of them since they were placed along the way to the main objectives, so I figured why not. It's obviously intentional design to place them this way, extending the playtime in the DLC, but I still think they aren't worth the effort, with the rewards being locked to the DLC instance. All in all, this expansion is an enjoyable experience that maybe overstays its welcome a little bit. Okay, I've been dreading this one. The Year of the Snake expansion was the final addition to Sleeping Dogs, being an epilogue to the main campaign, taking place directly after the events of the main story. This one is played completely straight and can be considered the final act of Wei Shen's story. Wei has been suspended from undercover and detective duty, now being assigned as a beat cop by Detective Tang. While making his route around town, Wei sees a car driving extremely fast and dangerously, pulling into a nearby market. Wei pursues the driver on foot, eventually locating the suspect and arresting him, which leads us directly into a new mechanic. In fact, there's only a couple of new mechanics in this DLC, so I'll get them out of the way here. First, like I just said, we can now arrest hostile NPCs. We can grapple targets and hit the grapple input again to place low health enemies into handcuffs, taking them out of fights. We can also now use a stun gun on grappled opponents, dealing consistent high damage while leaving them stunned in the grapple. This disables grapple combos, so your unarmed moveset is worsened for the entirety of this expansion, which kinda sucks, especially when fighting brawlers who need to be grapple comboed. Now you're forced to just hit them with the taser. Lastly, we can arrest NPCs at cop cars by dragging them over to the back of a cruiser. This works like an environmental takedown, just eliminating an enemy quickly in a fight. All of these mechanics are fine. I just wish their inclusion was worked into the base game somehow, outside of the side cop gigs, to make Wei being a police officer more meaningful in the main campaign. The stun gun attack effectively makes grappling less useful in combat since grapple combos could temporarily stun enemies or set them up for powerful takedowns. Now, with a stun gun, you're forced to just hold an enemy in place for a while other opponents can hit you and knock you out of the grapple. I wish the stun gun worked a little differently, or at least was assigned to different inputs so you could still use your grapple combos. Anyways, Wei arrests the first suspect by handcuffing him during a fistfight. Wei chases a second man and he runs into a police barricade, allowing us to arrest him with the squad car, introducing that arrest sequence as well. Finally, we chase down a third suspect, which leads us into a quick fistfight against 4 men, prompting us to use the new stun gun attack, introducing all of the new mechanics in this DLC in the first 5 minutes of the first mission. I'm sure I sound a little annoyed when I say that everything new has already been shown, but I'm not. I guess I'm just surprised that United Front Games decided to blow their load and essentially show everything they added to this expansion in just a few minutes. While heading to the next objective, you might notice a collectible that's present in this expansion, an evidence bag. I don't think collecting these gives you anything exclusive to the DLC or in the base game, so yeah, these are the worst ones showcased in the downloadable content. There's 20 to find. I think I went out of my way to pick up 5 and then confirmed online that you don't get anything for getting all 20, so I stopped bothering. Once you walk past the meaningful collectible, we head on to the next objective, investigating a nearby car. Investigating the car reveals that there's a bomb inside the trunk, which Wei reports in to the HKPD operator. The operator tells Wei to wait for the bomb squad, but Wei doesn't listen, instead taking the car and driving it into a harbor nearby. While driving, the operator gets upset with Wei not following orders yet again, but Wei insists that he's saving the neighborhood. The car explodes in the ocean, and we get to see a little 3D movie maker effect of an explosion. I really doubt that bomb would have taken out the whole block, but you do you, Wei. Wei continues on the trail of suspects, having caught their license plate number and giving it to dispatch, sending him to a nearby address. Wei arrives at a warehouse packed with tools and devices for making bombs, along with some obvious signs that there's more attacks to come. Some guys find Wei snooping around, and another fight breaks out. We then cut to an interrogation with Wei, Detective Tang, and one of the suspects from the car bomb incident. The bomb guy has some wacky teachings from a great Master Chu talking about a new world order coming in with a new year. It sounds like Master Chu and his cult have a big terrorist plot that will take place on the Lunar New Year. Tang gets some more info that a local dealer is around and sends Wei undercover to investigate what he's selling, if he's involved with the cult's plot. Unfortunately for Wei, he's tailed to the meeting and the cult ambushes him as he gets to the dealer. Fighting off the cultist, Wei chases down the dealer into a police blockade and arrests him, placing him in the cruiser. Wei enters the vehicle and interrogates the dealer on the way to the station. Doesn't sound very ethical, but hey, I guess Wei is above the rules, right? On the way, we get into a chase and a shootout, taking out many cars the cult sends our way. This chase sequence kind of condenses my issues with this DLC. Year of the Snake gives us more Sleeping Dogs content, sure, but it's all the excitement without any of the intrigue. It expects its paper-thin narrative to warrant car chases, boat chases, extended shootouts, and many fistfights. The base game did too, but it at least broke it up with the balancing act of Wei's life, the interconnected feuds of the Triad, and the meddling of higher-ups in the Hong Kong police. I know a DLC can't have the same narrative weight that the base game did with its length, but man, it really throws everything in the Sleeping Dogs book at you without giving you anything in return, narratively or otherwise. Let's keep moving along. I don't want to talk about Year of the Snake any more than I feel the need to. Following that mission, I decided to check out what side content the expansion had to offer, and it was even more of a waste of time than the Nightmare in North Point stuff. I'm gonna let one play out in its entirety, sped up so that we don't have to sit here forever. And that's it. That's all of the side content. Brief, maybe 90-second long jobs that are a fight, or an arrest, or a brief chase. These favors in the base game weren't much different, but at least they strung you along for a few minutes. These gigs in the DLC can last under a minute. Again, all of the excitement without any of the intrigue. Getting back to the main missions, we have 3 to pursue. They're all bomb threats across the central neighborhood, repeating the exact same content we just played out, like driving a car into the harbor or fighting some guys and arresting them. One of them is kind of funny as a cultist activates his bomb prematurely and the objective changes from chasing him to avoiding him. That's it, moving on. After these bombs are disposed of, we have, you guessed it, more bombs. This time, they're attached to minibuses driving their routes through the city. Wei gets to the bus, pulls it over with his siren on the squad car, and disarms the bomb in the back. We do this 3 times, but with the exciting twist on the third that we get to fight some guys. Next, we head to the fish market to stop their bomb maker from producing any more bombs, and we fight some guys on the way. We arrest the bomb maker, placing him in the trunk of a nearby car, then we get in a car chase and shoot cultists in pursuit. I'm sorry, if it seems like I'm breezing through this just because I don't enjoy this DLC, it's that, but also this is genuinely all it's giving me. Wei just heads to the next objective and does some cop stuff and continues on his way to the next cop thing he has to do. I'm not trying to present it as I'm speeding through the content here, the game is at the wheel and speeding through itself. Alright, up next we get a call about a riot in progress nearby. Wei heads over, gets outfitted with some SWAT gear, and we get to dish out some Hong Kong branded police brutality. Seriously, the first group we beat up are like peaceful protesters with picket signs, it's kind of absurd. We continue our 2025 cop simulator by beating up anybody in the 20-foot radius, eventually getting our hands on a tear gas launcher and dispersing crowds. We continue to gas and beat civilians and cultists for another 5 minutes or so until we get a call about multiple cult attacks going on around the city. We again have 3 separate objectives to tackle, each being a different burst of dopamine without any narrative substance. A car chase, a shootout in a dockyard, and a shootout in a park. What's next? Oh, thank God. And now we're at the final mission, gunning to take down Master Chu before the strike of midnight. We take a needlessly long drive down to the harbor so Tang can get a few joke lines in, and once we reach the docks, we begin the worst section of the DLC so far. I guess, thankfully, it's at the end? Tang drives a boat through the Hong Kong harbor while cultists pursue us and shoot from the mainland and docks. This goes on for almost 5 minutes, effectively a turret section, so it's mindless firing until you reach the next objective. This was the moment that really radicalized me against this DLC. Up until now, I was bored, this cemented everything as busy work and where I wrote down the phrase excitement without any of the intrigue, later realizing it was applicable to the DLC as a whole. Like, this just sucks. It really saps the Sleeping Dog bag of tricks for anything it has to make a fun set piece and just throws it at the player a mile a minute. I really dislike the Year of the Snake DLC. Where the other 2 were brief distractions that lack a little substance, this expansion is an active waste of your time. Getting back to the mission at hand, we arrive on a barge in the middle of the ocean. Wei shoots some cultists, and Master Chu is quickly arrested without a boss fight, which actually I'm glad he didn't get a boss fight. They aren't very good. Wei talks to Chu as he rambles about his plan going off without a hitch. They count down to midnight when Chu's plan should be going into effect, and Wei gloats that nothing is coming with the new year, dissolving Chu's delusion right in front of him. And it's over. You get sent back to the central police station, you unlock some outfits for the main campaign that, again, you were supposed to have beaten before playing this. I don't really know what else to say. I've complained about the Year of the Snake DLC throughout this section enough already, and I think I just summarized my thoughts and feelings on it a few moments ago. There's an interesting phenomenon online the last few years about pieces of media that were overlooked or secretly masterpieces, and Sleeping Dogs is often one of those games included in those lists. I don't think it deserves that. A game or movie or TV show or anything can exist with its strengths and weaknesses. Not everything has to be a great game that you missed, or the worst movie ever made. Sometimes games can come out, have some really strong aspects or interesting moments, and still just be okay. I think Sleeping Dogs falls into that camp. Going into this playthrough, I had nothing but fond memories of Sleeping Dogs. An exciting melee combat system which was an outlier in the genre, with a star-studded cast that brings the presentation of the main campaign up a few notches. Though, like I mentioned earlier, those fond memories seem to have glazed over a majority of the game, the lackluster open world, the inconsistent tone and pace of the story, and half of the combat in the game being more style than substance. I don't know if I would recommend Sleeping Dogs anymore. At least not with a heavy caveat that you should only play the main missions, and that even those missions might feel a little disjointed. If the open world of your open world crime sandbox is the lowest point and worst value of the game, why is it included at all? I think Sleeping Dogs would have benefited heavily from being a shorter, linear story featuring the same characters and setting, leading to the game coming out on the other side a lot more put together. As it stands, I think Sleeping Dogs ends up being another drop in the bucket of crime sandboxes from the 7th generation of consoles, with its strengths not being enough to hold it up from the worst aspects of the game. I imagine some of the issues I have with the title is a lot of holdover from its True Crime Hong Kong days, fitting more nicely into the mold of the True Crime franchise, but I really think United Front Games should have pivoted away from the genre and focused on the better parts that they had, and improved the game around what made it unique. Sleeping Dogs is an inconsistent experience, with some above average highs and middling run-of-the-mill lows that you'd expect from the genre, but I'm glad I played it again. In my 20s, I've taken a lot of my free time and put it to replaying games to reassess my opinion of them, from what I thought from my childhood and teenage years, and replaying this has been a perfect encapsulation of that experience. A game that I've loved and fawned over that needed a more critical eye to see through its shine. Sleeping Dogs is just another okay game, and that's fine by me. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far in the video, consider subscribing to see more content from me in the future. Definitely more to come this year. Hope to see you for the next one. Hey again. If you're unfamiliar, at the end of these videos, I talk without a script about the production of the video and what is coming next, or how I felt about the video, just kind of anything that comes to my mind, after watching the video back myself. So first up, I want to say that this took me way longer than I wanted it to. It's been about 2 months since I uploaded something, and that's not something that I want to keep up or be the norm, you know? December was a really busy month for me. I got really sick. I had people visiting. I went on an out-of-state vacation. It was a lot, so I didn't really have time to work on the video. I think I finished Sleeping Dogs like right before I left for my vacation, and then I just kind of had to wait and sit on it for 2 or 3 weeks, which is okay. Obviously, I have a life outside of this. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to, I don't know, hold myself accountable for putting these out in a more timely fashion. Which leads me to the most major thing I want to mention at the end of this video is that throughout 2025, I would like to upload at least once a month, these like long form kind of videos. I know I put out the Monomyth video, and that was a shorter video, just kind of talking about a random game, and that's not what I'm looking to put out every month. Ideally, every month will be one of these videos, a long one about a single game, but there might be some small ones here and there. I don't know, undecided. But that was kind of the main thing I wanted to talk about, the delay and my plan for 2025. I am a bit, I guess, curious about how this video is going to be received. I know Sleeping Dogs has kind of amassed this cult following online, and here I am saying, hey guys, you're kind of wrong. So I guess, I don't know, I'm a little nervous and hesitant to put this one out, frankly, but you know, I'm not doing this for the views. We're just speaking our mind here. I don't have a whole lot else to add for this one, I guess. Thank you very much again for watching. Thank you for everyone that's been watching since the first video, or this is your first one. Thank you for tuning in. I don't know. I'm not really good at this audience retention thing. It's an acquired skill, I guess. Yeah, thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hopefully it will be out by the end of February, because that's the promise I just made. Hope to see you then.